then we'll take it out right now.
Want to reconvene the meeting of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and I'll start with roll call. I'm Tim Nesbitt, the chair. Commissioner Duval is on her way. Commissioner Bryant.
Here.
Commissioner Dias.
Here.
Commissioner Ramirez is excused. Commissioner Reeves.
Here.
Commissioner Roper, I believe, is on his way. Commissioner Rubio.
Here.
Commissioner Wise is on. Commissioner Duncan Wise is on his way. Commissioner Ayers Grabowski.
Here.
Commissioner Fulmer.
Present.
Commissioner Goulard.
Here.
Commissioner Jimenez.
Here.
And Commissioner Lamar Wise.
Here.
Some of you in attendance were with us yesterday during our strategic planning meeting. And today is both a continuation of that meeting in terms of more discussion of the issues we addressed yesterday. Also an opportunity for those of you who are with us or those of you joining us for the first time to give us your views and advice as we frame our work going forward. So with that, we want to begin with public testimony. And we have three groups represented this morning who we've invited to join us, and then we have a sign-in sheet for those who would like to address the commission thereafter. We're asking our invited guests to limit their remarks to about 5 minutes, and depending on the time remaining, we'll see how we can allot the time for other public testimony. So I'd like to begin with the Oregon Community College Association, and I believe that's Andrea Henderson. I just want to also note that Commissioner Wise and Commissioner Roper have joined us. Morning, Andrea.
Good morning. For the record, Andrea Henderson, Executive Director of the Oregon Community College Association. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this morning. So I hope to have each of your meetings bring you an update of what's happening in the community college world. So first I wanted to start with just a little bit about what the OCCA is to help you understand kind of the context of that world. We are a council of government of the 17 community colleges, and I work for a 34-member board, which is the president of each community college. And then each college has a locally elected board of 7, and they elect one person to be on my board as well, which makes up the 34 membership. And we do all the advocacy for the community colleges, and we do all the board development for the board members and other services, legal services for the colleges, and a variety of different things that the colleges might need from the state association. So, and we do try to, in our advocacy, always bring a consensus opinion of the 17 community colleges. We have regular communication, weekly phone calls, and ensure that whatever that the association is representing is really what the 17 colleges collectively wish to have. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about both kind of our hopes for the HEC, and then also a little bit about some of the work that the colleges are doing. And we want to close with any questions that you might have. So I guess to start with, and some of you that heard me talk during the legislative session as 3120 was being drafted probably heard me talk about this. But it's really the sense of the collective we. That from the community college world, we really want to be part of a team with the HEC, and to really have a sense that all of us, both the HEC, the local boards, the presidents, the community colleges, the OCCA, that we're all working together on behalf of our students and thinking about what our students need and how we move that collective agenda forward in Oregon. And then we each have a role to play in that collective agenda, but really want to work in collaboration with the HEC to think about really focusing on how we best serve our students across the state, not in any one institution, but really our students as a whole. And I think really part of this stems from how our locally elected boards function. And each of our institutions has a locally elected board that really focuses on what that community needs and looks at the college, where the college is going, what the strategic direction of that college, and how it reflects that community's needs. And certainly there is an important role also for looking at the state as a whole. And our hope is that really we create a really strong partnership between the HEC looking at the needs of the state and the 17 local boards looking at the needs of 17 local communities to reach a place where there's a joint effort that moves all of us forward. So that's really, I think, our hope for the HEC as you all get started. And then the next piece I really wanted to talk about was some of the work that we're doing in community colleges right now. And yesterday I heard Betty Duval talk about a reading list, and so I would like to add a piece to your reading list that I will forward on to Betty. But there's been a tremendous amount of work done in the community colleges over the last couple of years. That's what kind of collectively is called the completion agenda. And in some sense, it's a reimagining of the community colleges and what our kind of underpinning foundation is as colleges. Our national association, the Association of AACC, American Association of Community Colleges, convened a report that I will send on to Betty called the 21st Century Commission Report that really kind of lays out a new agenda for community colleges as we move forward with very specific action plans in terms of what needs to happen. And so I will send that to Betty and encourage you all to read it, to take a look at, from a national standpoint, what's happening and then how we might do that in Oregon and kind of where we are in that process, particularly as you are drafting your strategic plan to look at some of these national conversations and national ideas. And I think to kind of summarize really where we are as community colleges, when the colleges really started in the 60s and 70s and most of our colleges were opened, it was with a foundation of open access, and that was really the sense of the mission of community colleges. It's access for everybody. Everybody can come in the door that wants to. And in the last 5 to 7 years or so, that tone is changing with an understanding of that maybe is not enough for our students, because unless they're getting access to something that's meaningful for them and they're actually moving into a job or whatever their goal is in a meaningful way and not just racking up debt, that's not good enough for our students. And how do we help our students to move through to complete whatever it might be? In community colleges, it's not always a certificate or degree. Sometimes it's just a series of courses that they need. But whatever that might be, how are we helping them to actually move and complete their goals? And I think one of the things that community colleges have discovered is that open access alone isn't enough, and it's not good enough for our students. And so we're really trying to rethink who we are as colleges, how we are structured, and how do we help students succeed in a better way. There's a ton of national research that's come out in the last couple of years and a lot of thinking around this. But it's tough work because we are trying to fundamentally add a new tenet to our mission of access and success and completion. And so that's kind of the journey we're on right now as community colleges. And so really kind of invite you to participate in that with us and think about what does that mean for Oregon, for our institutions in Oregon, and most importantly for our students, and how might we all collectively work to continue to make that happen. So with that, I'm going to stop my brief remarks this morning and answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Andrea. Do we have any questions of Ms. Henderson? Neil?
Andrea, other than funding, what's the biggest challenge for community colleges right now?
I think the biggest challenge really is this piece about how do we rethink some of our systems. So certainly funding is a part of that because you need funding to make change sometimes because you need to actually operationalize it. But I think that's really the biggest piece is as we think about what we're not doing well enough for our students. So as we think about pieces like developmental ed, and there's national research showing that students that get into developmental ed very rarely succeed with a degree. How do we rethink how we are offering our services? How do we rethink delivering developmental ed in a fundamental way? How do we rethink how our students actually progress through the system? I think those are huge challenges, and they're great questions, but there aren't easy answers, and it's going to take time to kind of change this huge structure of community colleges to do things differently. So I think that's a huge challenge. I think the other piece that we're also talking about is our distribution formula and how might we bring some recommendations on that. And I think at a base level, the question is if we have a formula that's completely predicated on access, how might we do it differently to make sure that we are recognizing the success of our students and making sure that it's a system that helps us do what we want to do with our students.
If I could follow up, I've been in a number of national conferences in the last year or so, and the developmental ed issue comes up a lot. And generally, my understanding is that there's evidence, more and more evidence, that students may show up at your doorstep, so to speak, and test just below the entry requirements for the college level courses, and then are tracked into a full term of developmental education, when in fact maybe just a couple of weeks of focused work or even direct access to the college level work with additional support and mentoring. The evidence shows that those other models have much greater success in getting students through and on to the college level work and completion. So as I'm sure those are the kinds of ideas that you're referring to under that heading, and what we would like to know is not only what ideas work better, but how can our funding formulas work better to support those good ideas. Larry.
I'm really intrigued by the thought that open access is no longer, could only be sort of a sufficient guiding ethos for community colleges. Have you rethought what you think should be the standard on which you would measure what are the grounding values for the existence or the role of community colleges?
Well, Chair Nesbitt, Commissioner Roper, I think it's a much broader, it's a national conversation, so it's certainly just not me. But I think really the conversation is embedded in this notion that access always has been the funding piece, but it's adding on success for the students. That sense that just getting them in the door isn't enough unless we're ensuring that they get out the door with whatever it is that they need, whether that's one course or 3 courses or a certificate or a degree or transfer. And that too often when we focus just on the access, it's not enough. For example, the colleges traditionally have let students come in late to terms. So if you want to register late, oh, no problem. We don't want late registration to be a barrier to students. But the research actually shows those students very rarely actually complete the course. So in essence, what we're doing is we're letting them in late, we're taking their money, but they're not getting something that's of value to them. And so that's an example of a policy that kind of goes against that notion of open access, but limiting late registrations really is better for students. And so it's rethinking some of those things, and really I think that second tenet, adding that second tenet, which is the success of the students. And I think it's critically important.
Well, good. We'll look forward to further dialogue
All
as
right.
we proceed. Thank you, Andrea.
No, but I think.
Do we have a representative of the Oregon Student Association next? Great. Welcome.
Good morning, Chair Nesbitt, Vice Chair Duvall, and the members of the Commission. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you all this morning. My name is Travis Mavison. I'm the Western Oregon University Student Body President and a member of the Oregon Student Association Board of Directors. The Oregon Student Association is a statewide coalition of student governments that represent over 120,000 public university and community college students and advocates for access to an affordable and quality post-secondary education. In addition to our robust legislative advocacy work, we also work to engage students in our state's electoral process, having registered over 50,000 students in the last election cycle, making our work the largest nonpartisan effort in our state's history. Last month, we concluded our statewide student issue choosing survey, collecting over 25,000 surveys from students on Oregon's community college and university campuses. Across the board, students indicate the cost of tuition and fees, textbooks, and food insecurities as top priorities to continue to address. Of the issue on the survey, food insecurity on our campuses has been one of the most disappointing to see elevated. With the cost of attending colleges going through the roof, students have been left to dumpster dive or go without eating altogether in order to pay for that textbook or extra term of class that hadn't been available in the previous term due to budget cuts. More and more food banks are popping up on college campuses as a result of this. We don't believe food banks are the best solution to fix the problem of students starving. Though it's a relief that students are taking care of each other in times of need, the real issue at hand is budgetary problems. Though the state was able to give public university and community colleges more funding over previous bienniums, through the last regular and most recent special session, it still isn't where it should be in terms of investment, and funding for the Oregon Opportunity Grant isn't meeting the needs of the students. We are working with students of other higher education stakeholders to address all affordability needs in post-secondary education institutions, and will be prepared to work with the legislature, the HEC, and the governor's office to see through any future plans to increase access and affordability and halt the growing student debt problem our nation and state are currently facing. Because we know going to college shouldn't be a lifelong burden and shouldn't be cause for distress for us while in school. As you all prepare to transition authority from the State Board of Higher Education and the Oregon Student Access Commission to the HEC, we are prepared to work with you to ensure the needs of the Oregon's college and university systems are not lost through the cracks. But these realities for students aren't going to take a pause. Students need relief now, and any work you do as a whole or in committees should have a great sense of urgency and intention. It is time to make education more affordable to all Oregonians. Thank you for your time, and is there any questions?
Thank you. Betty?
I too am distressed by the notion of food insecurity and that it seems so widespread, including in universities where one doesn't ordinarily think that that would exist. I guess I have a two-part question. What do you see as potential solutions? What are students thinking might help with that, if not food banks or whatnot? And second part of that is that caused by high tuition and textbook costs? Would reducing that make a difference?
Well, from what I've talked to students on Western Oregon's campus, the idea of getting food stamps and food support while in college has been very difficult for them. While they might not be eligible through that. And what was the second part? Sorry.
Well, the first part was, what is the solution?
Yeah.
You know, what could we do? And then the second part is, what accounts for the food insecurity? What accounts for not having money for food?
What?
Is it tuition? Is it textbooks?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think a lot of them are trying to go full-time to pay for their tuition, or work full-time to actually pay for these things that they're going to school for. And that's causing a lot of their pocket money for extra food or food in general to go towards the textbooks or go to paying their fees so they can afford to go to college for the next term. And I think a lot of people have seen kind of more access to food stamps as a possible solution for this while being in college. That's what students have spoke to me about personally.
Rob?
Charles, how serious an issue do you think student fees are as opposed to tuition? One of the things that happened several years ago at Portland State was that they rolled up almost all fees into tuition so that they were covered by financial aid. Is that something that you see as an issue for students at other universities in the system?
For student fees?
For fees.
For fees in general, I think that it's a combination of both. I think the idea of actually trying to make sure that you're reducing, or at least keeping the student fees as low as possible, and possibly trying to adjust that in order to kind of keep everything at the standard. But I think any raise, I know at Western, we've seen a lot of raises in these fees due to a lot of just current service level stuff going up.
Lamar?
Yeah, I don't know if you said it in your testimony, but could you repeat for us the other priority issues that OSA has decided on?
Other priority issues, textbook and tuition affordability are some of them, as well as in the last weekend, we kind of looked at some of our other priority issues, and definitely some of those are addressing the issue of sexual assault and prevention and education on college campuses. That's something that a lot of students have actually want to be advocating more for, and as well as cultural competency for faculty and staff. A lot of students feel like faculty and staff need to be more aware of the students they're serving.
Cool, thank you. And to kind of respond to like the food or food sovereignty problem situation, I also think like I know some of the districts like in high school or elementary school. I remember there's like free and reduced lunch programs, and maybe we could look into something like that too, because I know some campuses have some type of food services, and maybe we could suggest something based on income. Students can get some type of reduced costs to food, something like that. So I think that'd be interesting to look into. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Annie.
I just wanted to add on to that a little bit more. I think one of the issues too within food sovereignty is also students being able to access or not being able to access healthy and affordable foods on campus. I think the healthy part is a big factor because although we can implement programs that help reduce or have access to free lunch on campus, I think the healthy part is a huge part of why students have this on their priority issues because they're not able to access healthy and affordable foods on campus. So I know back at Lane Community College, where I'm from, we're in the works of implementing a food pantry on our campus because before there hasn't been one. And the healthy part is one of the things that we're making sure that students are being able to access healthy food as opposed to the food that we have on our campus that is not healthy and that is very high cost to students.
Great. Larry?
And no question, I just want to validate your observation about the food insecurity. It's something we've seen, it's a really profound issue among students. But thanks for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony. I would just say, likewise, we really hadn't heard a focus on that food insecurity issue before, so it does get our attention. I think this is exactly the kind of issue where at the institution level, students and their campus presidents, their administrators can probably be fashioning solutions that work for them. It's good that we hear about it, but I'm not sure this is going to make it to the level of a HEC policy, just so I want to make that clear.
Okay.
Thanks very much. And then we have Larry Large from the Alliance.
Good morning. I'm Larry Large. I'm president of the Oregon Alliance of Independent Colleges and Universities. We represent 19 of the not-for-profit colleges and universities that are independent in the state of Oregon. I want to begin by acknowledging my appreciation for this commission's work and your openness to be considering us as a partner, a contributing partner to the state's interests. Many of you have heard me say on other occasions that our institutions and our interests are fully aligned with what the state's objectives are, particularly as expressed by 40-40-20. If we do not support and have a healthy education system at the K-12 level or at the post-secondary level in the public sector, we won't have a healthy economy, and our institutions will not flourish without a good, solid educational system and a good, solid economy. So we're partners in that. We share the goals and not competitors with that process. I appreciate the opportunity routinely to be here, as your predecessors did, and give you some updates from time to time about what our issues are. Let me just say that many of you know about us and what we do. Some others of you maybe not quite so much. I just want to mention a couple of 3 metrics here. We actually produce 30% of the degrees in that first bucket of 40 on the 40-40-20. That is to say, bachelor's degree and higher. We are the source of 30% of that degree production. And a little bit in the column, and we produce half of the teachers actually in K through 12 in terms of those who graduate with teacher certification eligibility from our schools. We also, we do 67% of the lawyers. Now, we can argue about that once in a while, whether that's a good thing or not. But teasing Commissioner Bryant here just a little bit.
It's not the
Economic development.
it's not the percentage, Larry. It's the total number.
I did want to make a little bit, though, in the column of Mythbusters. I think we're often misunderstood as to the students whom we serve. We have 31% of our students are Pell eligible, and that's a marker for low income. And that's very similar to what the Oregon University system does. Our minority population, our minority enrollment is plus or minus 1% different than it is in the Oregon University system. So that we're contributing, we're educating the demographic of Oregon. And that, I think, is something that we want everybody to understand. And while our core image, our core institutions are often thought of as liberal arts institutions, and indeed they are. But there are two things about that that require qualification. One of those is that we have science is a part of liberal arts. So when it comes to the STEM areas, we're actually doing, we do 14% of our graduates are in the STEM area. We have business, we do another 15%, and these are within 1 percentage point exactly what happens in the public system at the 4-year level in the state. So just to get that sense out there, I know that sometimes we're misunderstood as only dealing with wealthy kids or the majority students or from out-of-state students. That's not who we are. We do some of that. You saw the in-migration numbers yesterday from David Longnecker, and so, but we have about a little less than half of our students in the collective come in from out of state, but most of our students come from in-state, and many of those students who come from out of state stay, which is a good thing for the Oregon economy in lots of different ways. I do want to say another thing where I'm serving on the 529 board of that, which has a major impact on affordability. It brings into play the student and family savings early in the cycle, and so I'm very proud to be serving on that board with Treasurer Wheeler. I've served on the Credit for Prior Learning Subcommittee of the Prior Commission and continue to serve with the folks there, and you'll have a report on that, a little announcement of one here and then next time. We also are a partner with the Columbia Gorge Regional Initiative on credit for our concurrent enrollment, or sometimes called dual credit. We're participating in that. We're taking a very different kind of approach to it. And it is basically that we will offer through one of our campuses, Linfield College, will offer online courses to juniors and seniors in the region. We'll be a part of the portal of that set of offerings. Community colleges and Eastern and others in Oregon State are also offering courses, but in a different way than we are. The students whom we're going to serve on this will be taking classes exclusively with other people who are enrolled in college. This will be a full college course. It'll be transcribed on the Linfield form, so it will transfer for them. Oregon Health Sciences University has given us permission to use some of their regional facilities so that we will send the circuit rider instructor out to the region at least once a month to meet with families and students if they want to. It'll be completely voluntary. Here's a little twist on it that's different. We're beta testing this in Massachusetts right now. But what we're doing with it is if the student is from a family that's first generation, we're going to offer the course that student enrolls for free to one of the two parents. And so that the parent and the student will take the course simultaneously. That's their option, it's not required. But the idea there is that if this is a first generation student, we want family support when that student migrates away to a campus at some point or is likely to. And then a tertiary benefit, which is out there and we don't know that will happen, but it might motivate the parent then to stay and use distance education, use online delivery to perhaps make progress toward her or his own degree process. We have 8 of our campuses that offer degree completion or adult education. Merrillhurst has been a real contributing partner to this as a leader in credit for prior learning or prior learning assessment. We've learned a lot from them. Linfield does it, Northwest Christian does it in Eugene, and Corbin right here. We have a very active group, Warner Pacific in Portland. Altogether, there are 8 of our campuses that serve that proportion of the population that is with a little college, maybe no college, but their work requirements will make it necessary for them to try to finish a degree. We support that and have been doing that for quite some time. So we also will interact with you in the Office of Degree Authorization in ways. We don't need to go into that today, but I track that. I spent last week in Washington, D.C. on the federal level with something called the State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement. It's something we will all learn more about, not always because we like to, but we will. It's a little bit of a complex problem that'll come our way, and you will be deeply engaged in that. I'll serve as a resource to you, and obviously we have a vested interest in how that plays out. So at the point, we are supporting the idea of a reciprocity agreement, but it is complex, and so I just would alert you to that. Finally, we are very proud of the contribution we make. Our students from Oregon are eligible to receive the Opportunity Grant, which you also intersect with. We actually take we're about an 8% partner in that total program. We're very proud of the degree completion of those. Those students finish equal to or better than our normal students in the progress toward graduation. And you saw some of our graduation rates yesterday, which we're pleased about. So, and again, we're educating that Oregon demographic. So we think that Oregon's getting a good ROE, a good return on education for what our partners in the private sector want to contribute to the state's interest in 40-40-20. I'll take any questions if you have them.
Thank you. Rob?
I was wondering, how many students do all the Alliance schools
32,321.
tend to graduate?
I lied about the 21.
Yes,
That's total enrollment?
That's total.
And so your graduation cohort is somewhere in the area of 6,000 to 7,000 each year, or?
Well, that's at the graduate level and the undergraduate
that's
level
total,
combined.
okay.
That's a combined enrollment, that 32.
Say your undergraduate.
Is 28,000. It's the preponderance of the enrollment. I have to look, Rob, and I'll get back to you with the exact number.
That's fine.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was wondering is, do you have a sense of what percentage of your graduates stay in Oregon?
Over 50. It hovers right around 50 because some come in from out of state and go back. Some in-state migrate to the state of Washington or New York, but it's just a little over 50%.
Thank you.
Kirby?
Thank you so much for coming here. This is really quite, I haven't seen these statistics for a while, but they're very impressive, so I have to congratulate. It's really something. One of the things that I had an opportunity to attend is the National College Fair. My understanding is that this was the first time that it had ever visited Portland, and it was an eye-opening experience for me. It was a lot of fun. But one of the things that struck me, and I love your comments on it, is when I actually started doing the calculations for tuition fees and books from a public institution in Oregon versus a private institution in Oregon, I found that in some cases the private institutions, because of how they support the student financially, actually was less expensive.
Yeah.
Can you comment on kind of those comparisons and
Absolutely, it's a fair, but as I say sometimes tongue-in-cheek, it's a big fat sloppy generalization, but you have to, it really is an individual case-by-case assessment. 90% of our students across the system receive financial aid. And this is a number that I don't know, you can read about it in the paper, but we discount tuition as some form of aid. We use donations from alumni to help support financial aid, and we use endowment income from some of the schools. But by and large, our schools are what's called tuition dependent by the educational economists. So there is this work of making sure that we get the right balance in there. And it's in our interest, both of the campus and the student, to get them through in an orderly way. The closer we can get to that 4-year mark, with graduation, the cheaper it is for the student. And that's not even taking into account the foregone income for the extra year or 2 or 3 that some students unfortunately end up spending because they can't get to courses or a variety of reasons. And I'm not making a judgment about that. It's just, I know though that foregone income makes a big difference to get into graduate school, to get into the workforce earlier. If you calculate that, the generalization is often very accurate. Thank you.
Neil.
Larry, what keeps you awake at night concerning this hack in higher education?
Yeah, what keeps me awake at night are about 3 different items. One of those is the student debt affordability issue. And while we have good metrics on that, we're within $1,000 average debt for those who borrow. It's about $26,000 to $27,000 per baccalaureate degree. You can get higher than that in the graduate degrees. We've got to come to grips with what the costs are. What's driving the tuition up that therefore drives up the indebtedness? And you heard yesterday, I think, in your retreat and from various participants, that it's hard to do the cost accounting to know where we're spending the money. I will say something here that is a little, and I have no agenda about this, but the fact of the matter is, very little of the increase since the mid-1990s in looking at the cost is attributable to instructional costs. So much of it is in other kinds of costs, like athletics, like technology, like marketing, like healthcare on the campuses, like security on the campuses. That's where the steepest increases in the costs have been. And I would exhort this group to look as much as you can, and I know your commitment, I heard it yesterday and applaud it, to good data from whatever sources. And that, I think it behooves us all, not because we should change the pattern, but we should know what it is and then make the right choices for our investment of public and personal funds to the educational enterprise. The other thing that keeps me awake, Neil, is that I think we are our tuition models and financial models, particularly in the independent sector, are under challenge. We discount in the neighborhood of 40 to 45% on average. As an economist, that troubles me. I don't know the sustainability of that. I don't know what the upside is. We've got work to do as an industry. And I think I watch our colleagues at the University of Oregon, from which I hold 2 degrees. I watch them migrate in the same direction, and I think we're going to have to find a new model. I don't know what it is. I wish I could offer it up and lean into it, but I'm concerned about how that model is going to play out over the next 5 or 10 years.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Larry. We appreciate continuing to hear from you and to work with you.
I look forward to that too. Thank you very much.
We have one person signed up for testimony, and that's Hans Bernard on behalf of the University of Oregon. Welcome, Hans.
Good morning, Chair Nesbitt, members of the Commission. My name is Hans Bernard, here representing the University of Oregon. I wanted to take the opportunity here today at your first retreat to remind folks the context from the university perspective of your work and where we sit in that mix. Right now, we are in the midst of, I think, what can be described as the most complicated 8 months of change that the university system and university campuses have seen in Oregon in several decades. We are engaging in an effort to parse through issues of governance versus issues of coordination and determine on the campus level how those operating models work with independent governing boards at the 3 largest institutions in the state. In addition to that, there are several conversations going on about the future governance of other institutions in Oregon and how we will all move forward to work with you to fulfill the state's goals of 40-40-20. I think in this time of dramatic change, it is going to be incumbent on us on this side of the table, as well as folks on your commission, to communicate clearly and often about the challenges that we're facing, the difficulties and the issues that we're engaging with on campuses and with each other. On behalf of the University of Oregon, I did want to extend a hand that we are very excited about the concept of examining and having conversations about an outcomes-based funding model and looking closely at how we can be more strategic about how we invest state dollars. I can tell you, in my experience in the legislature, the level of communication and collaboration that is existing and happening right now across the post-secondary continuum between conversations with community college colleagues, other universities, students, faculty, staff is higher than I have seen in a long time. I'm very optimistic about the opportunity for these conversations to continue and think that we have an opportunity here to really change the dynamic and the conversation about post-secondary education in Oregon. In the last 2 weeks of the legislative session, I think it's important to note in 2013 that we saw a shift in conversations. For years, the conversations had been dominated by what is the structure and how are we all comprised and composited. Dating back to conversations around Senate Bill 242 and the autonomy of the university system to the discussions around independent governing boards. As those conversations came to a close at the end of the 2013 session, you begin to see a shift in the conversation to what are the resources we need to be successful in making sure students have opportunities on our campuses in Oregon. It is my belief, and I think that the hope of the University of Oregon, that we can continue that vein of conversation and work together with you as we figure out the differentiation between governing and coordinating, but really working together to tell the story of our campuses, community colleges, universities, faculty, and students, and have a deep conversation with the legislature about what resources are needed to ensure that students have the opportunity that we want them to have and that we can achieve the goals of 40-40-20. I'm happy to answer any questions folks might have. Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions for Hans? Okay, thanks very much, Hans. Commissioners, we are going to move now into action items on our agenda, and I want to also call your attention to two of the presentations which will follow from Gerald Hamilton on the community college funding allocation methodology and from Jay Kenton on the public university funding methodology known as the RAM. If yesterday it felt like we were going back to school with all the information we were absorbing, then today we're in grad school with those presentations. So I just want you to...
Without a degree, I might say.
Yeah. So just be prepared for, put your thinking caps on and take good notes when we get those presentations. I want to try and see if we can get through a little more quickly on our organizational items so we can get to those presentations. We have minutes to approve from our first meeting on October 10th. They're in your packet. They were emailed to you. I would make one change. Maybe there are others where it says members absent. It's actually members excused. Frank Goulard was excused in advance of that meeting. Any other changes?
I move approval.
Second.
It's moved to approve the minutes as amended with that one change. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Minutes are approved as amended. We have amendments now to our policies and procedures manual that you looked at in summary form, conceptual form, at our last meeting, and I'll ask Executive Director Ben Cannon to walk us through those.
Thanks, Tim. I'm not going to go through the entire blue line, I guess, red line, blue line version in detail, but these are generally amendments to existing HAC policies and procedures that bring this document into conformity with the legislation that passed in 2013 that, for example, changed the size and the composition and the authorities of the commission. On page 4, for example, the section on commission authorities and responsibilities, you get basically a reiteration of the duties and powers of the commission as established in ORS 351.735, so that's reflected there. Only two other things that I'll call out specifically. The first is on page 8, where under advice from the Attorney General's office that worked with me to propose these amendments to you, a quorum for the commission, and this is specific to the HEC in statute 351.722, a quorum of this commission is a majority of voting members, and likewise, for a motion to be adopted, at least a majority of the quorum must vote in favor of it. So you can, I don't have a table, but you can imagine one where 5 members of this 9 voting member commission constitute a quorum, and a majority of that quorum, so conceivably 3, if there were only 5 members present, 3 could act on behalf of the commission. That's a relatively weak in terms of what's required. 3 members if only 5 are present. I think it would suggest to me, if I remember this commission, I'd want to show up to ensure that it's not just a few members who are acting on behalf of 9 or really 14. So I just point that out because that is a change under advisement from the Attorney General. Finally, I'll point out on page 12, the policy here, policy number 6, has to do with compensation and reimbursement for expenses. You're kind of getting used to this process now in the reimbursements for and compensation for attendance at meetings. This policy establishes that commission members, voting or non-voting, all of you are eligible for reimbursement for expenses resulting from your participation in full commission meetings, special commission meetings, subcommittee meetings, or work groups of which you are an appointed member. So you are eligible and can work with Angela or other designated staff on ensuring that when you attend a work group or a subcommittee of which you're an appointed member, you receive reimbursement for expenses in conformity with state policy and HEC policy. I think those are the main provisions that were useful to highlight.
Thanks, Ben. I think there was somewhere mentioned, maybe it was a pre-existing text, that our motions do not require a second. Is that right?
That's right. And this most of what you have here obviously is sort of boilerplate for state commissions and boards, and that's right. Neither the legislature and its operations, its policies, nor boards and commissions typically require that second to be provided for motions.
Withdraw my second.
And just to be clear, so if you're a voting member, you can make a motion and of course vote on it. If you're a non-voting member, that's not part of your authority. However, remember, when it comes to your role on the commission, we want your full participation, and when it comes to your role in work groups and subcommittees, you are in those venues full voting members. Lamar.
Yeah, so is that because of the law, or is that something that we can change?
Yeah, I'm happy to follow because I spent some time with the Attorney General's office on this. No, it was clear that the law that it's clear to the Attorney General's office that the law that establishes that there are voting and non-voting members of this commission also requires that motions for action be limited to voting members. So we are certainly under advisement from the Attorney General's office that it would be inappropriate to permit non-voting members to make motions. That said, the policy acknowledges, as Tim just did, that all members may discuss the merits and demerits of the motion.
I think the question was, can it be changed, or is it in the action of the legislature?
So the statute itself does not speak directly to who can make motions.
No. Can that number of voting and non-voting members be changed?
Oh, yeah, no. The statute is very clear about the fact that this is a 14-member commission consisting of 9 voting members and 5 non-voting members.
Duncan?
Is the quorum issue, the vote, that was a surprise to me. I guess the past board I was on, you had to have a majority vote of the total. And is that a discretion, or is that in? No,
that is a HEC-specific statute that is actually from the original Senate Bill 242.
Okay.
That was drawn to my attention by the Attorney General's office. It's not unique to the HAC. There are other boards and commissions where this sort of less stringent requirement, the legislature has established a less stringent requirement for action, which of course provides this commission with considerable flexibility if not if fewer than 9 members are able to constitute a quorum for a meeting.
Any other questions? If not, I would ask for a motion to approve the policies and procedures as submitted to you.
So moved.
That's moved by Commissioner Bryant. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it, and we have a new set of policies and procedures. There's the next item called temporary rule adoption. Ben?
Yeah, so members, this was also emailed you in compliance with state law and policy, I think 10 days in advance of today's meeting. It is a very boilerplate proposal for procedural rules that really relate to the process of future rule adoption. So what you have here is absolutely standard for state boards and commissions. There's nothing substantive. In terms of higher education policy, it does establish the process that the commission will be required to use for subsequent rule adoptions, namely notice to interested parties and the public before any, and the commission itself before any action is taken.
Any questions of Ben on this? You all
As
have this.
stipulated, the furthest timeline in this is 49 days to the legislature, is that right? So no rule could be.
Yeah, that's correct. So permanent rule, and I'm going to look to Angela to correct me if I'm wrong. She's been through the training on this, but the stipulations here in the first section, the notice stipulations require to permanent rulemaking. And that is this 28-day requirement to our kind of distribution list and a 49-day requirement of notice to legislators and et cetera. Temporary rules we have somewhat more flexibility around in terms of notice and action.
Yeah, that's right. I am your rules coordinator for the commission, and the Attorney General's manual for administrative rules states that you don't have to give notice for temporary rules until after the fact. We did it before the fact because we want to keep the public informed. But for permanent rules, which we will be moving these in February, we will have that 49-day period in which the legislature and other stakeholders will be, they will know about this, and then we'll allow a period for public comment on it, and then we'll take a vote on the permanent rules in February.
So just to be clear, yes, the motion today is to adopt these as temporary rules. Very often, the rules this commission adopts will be first adopted as temporary rules and then within the required period of time converted, if you will, by action of the commission to permanent rules.
Correct.
So as I recall, our authority in regard to the funding formula is one we exercise through rule.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're working on the funding formulas for future fiscal years or future biennia, would just call attention to the fact we're going to have to work back and create a timeline that makes sure that we're consistent with a rulemaking timeline before we finalize our decisions.
And Tim, that'll be true for chapters and chapters of rules that this commission inherits authority for, not all of which may be as active a subject of discussion as the funding formula, but I think commissioners will be impressed and perhaps overwhelmed by the volumes of rules that you become responsible for overseeing and potentially changing, mostly effective July 1st, 2013, or 2014, excuse me.
Okay. Yeah, it's just something we're going to have to build into our strategic plan timelines because it's critical to our decision making.
And we will be lobbied.
Yeah, you will be lobbied. And we'll be getting useful input.
Mr. Chair, I move the adoption of the temporary rules.
It's been moved by Commissioner Bryant to adopt the temporary rules on our agenda as action item 3.3. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion carries. We now have a revised mission or vision statement, I believe. Was that passed out?
It's being passed out now.
Okay. And Commissioners, yesterday we talked about not wanting to get into the weeds on wordsmithing this, but we also distinguished a mission statement from a vision statement and concluded that what we had circulated previously was more of a vision statement. And we did take a cue from Commissioner Wise on the education beyond high school concept. So, educational achievement beyond a high school diploma. Does that work?
Great, thank you.
Okay.
You're very attentive, Mr. Chair. I was impressed.
And, well, this is, when you leave the wordsmithing to one person, you know, it can get done quickly. We're not changing anything else from what you saw, and we're not yet giving you a mission statement, because I feel like we need to be in tandem with our strategic planning process before we kind of put the man on the moon deadline that Kirby described to us. So if this meets your approval, we will adopt it as a vision statement, and we will subsequently, as we proceed with our planning, get more specific and adopt a mission statement. I'm seeing nods in the affirmative. Any discussion on that proposal? Okay then, is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, so moved. I saw Commissioner Roper, so moved. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have a vision. And that is that we will foster and sustain the best, most rewarding pathways to opportunity and success for all Oregonians through an accessible, affordable, and coordinated network for educational achievement beyond the high school diploma. So that's our mission. Thank you. Vision. Thank you. And now I've also passed around a revised list of the work groups and committees. As I expected, our discussion yesterday led to some changes, actually. So let me go over this with you. And before I go into the detail on this handout, I want to suggest that we work with the subcommittees in particular, of which I'm now creating 3 by my authority as your chair, and that we task the subcommittees, distinguishing the subcommittees from the work groups, with carrying forward the planning process we started yesterday, because we ended up putting a whole lot of ideas on the table, a broad funnel for which we're going to have to work down to a more prioritized and time-specific set of goals and objectives. So I think that work is best carried forward by the subcommittees on student success, which Carmen and Neil will chair and we will be part of. On academic excellence and institutional success, which Kirby Dias will chair and Frank Goulard will be part of. And then we combined here what was going to be a work group and maybe a committee into a subcommittee, achievement compacts and biennial budgets, which I will chair and Duncan Wise and David Reeves will join. Now you see, for all of the subcommittees, the first order of business is to prioritize, or rather for the 2, the academic excellence and student success subcommittees, prioritize and recommend our work plan. And what I would suggest is, here we are, next week is Thanksgiving week, so we're going into the holidays. What we can do is, at our December meeting, shorten our full commission agenda and leave time, a couple of hours, to build in the same time frame, meetings of those subcommittees. So in a sense that we're continuing our planning process. Ben, remind me date and place for the December meeting, for Angela?
In the state, we're at Higher Ed Room.
And date?
In Portland.
In the 4th.
Okay, and it's in the morning.
Correct.
And we had like roughly 8:30 to noon.
We have 9 o'clock until 1 p.m.
We have 9 until 1. Okay, and so we have a 4-hour block, and in that 4-hour block, we can take care of our full commission business, and we can also have meetings of our subcommittee then. I think that's going to be the best way to do it. And then we can look towards January to get final recommendations that will be incorporated in our strategic plan. So that gives the subcommittees a first meeting date of that December meeting date. and time to work through January if need be, to get our work better focused and organized. The work groups, which, the one on financial aid, which Larry Roper has already inaugurated, will be joined by Anna Yele Jimenez and Rob Fulmer. And the Pay It Forward work group will be chaired by Rob Fulmer, and will also include Lamar Wise. And because it's a work group, we can have non-HEC member voting members, and we're going to ask Mary King, who was the professor at Portland State who helped design the Pay It Forward plan, to be a voting member of the work group as well. Now, in addition, we're going to have resource persons, and you can see on this handout how we have in the financial aid work group, which Larry chairs, a number of non-HEC voting members and then a number of resource persons. All of our work groups and committees should include more resource persons than we've listed here. We'll work on those invitations and fill out the roster for those as we proceed between now and our December meeting. And also, all of our work groups and subcommittees will have a administrator. Endai Hartigan is doing that work for Larry's group. There's a lot of logistical work, scheduling and communications to be done there, so we're going to make sure that all of you who are serving on these work groups and subcommittees, especially those of you chairing them, have the support of an administrator. So how does this look? Any further questions? We don't need to take action on this because this is something that in my capacity as chair I can announce, but I want to make sure I'm announcing it with everybody's comfort and that we all feel this will work for us. Okay, Frank.
You had mentioned a work group on funding formula and a couple others.
That's going to be combined now into the achievement compacts and biennial budgets. That's where we see that.
Okay.
Okay.
Tim, on the work group for Pay It Forward, will that run at some point a recommendation through the financial aid committee, since it seems to be tied to that? Would that be the process?
Well, let's leave it to the chairs of those two work groups to coordinate. How's that? Good. Good.
Given that.
And in fact, that's Rob, you're on both.
Right,
So
and
there
that's
you go.
intentional because we see the synergy between the efforts in those two groups.
Great.
Given that a couple of things have been combined, I would like to volunteer then.
Okay, good, good.
To be on the Achievement Compacts and biennial budgets, if I might.
Great, very good. Yes, we will do that.
Thank you.
We are also designating 3 persons as our liaisons to the Oregon Education Investment Board's standing committees. Equity and Partnerships, Ramon Ramirez. Best Practices in Student Transitions, David Reeves. I talked to both of you about that. Duncan, I hadn't talked to you about this one. So, and because the outcomes and investments work of the OEIB includes not just post-secondary but K-12, and you have the experience you have from the Board of Education, I'm hoping you can do that. So. Well, great. Thank you all for getting us to this point. And Ben?
I was just reminded that the law requires the commission to continue to consider the issue of credit for prior learning through an advisory committee. So we will be adding that. That's composed of both HEC and non-HEC members, as I recall, and we'll be looking at, and this commission will be considering a kind of interim report from that group at an upcoming meeting. I'll describe it and point it out to you later today, but that's going to need to be on our list.
Yeah, I had thought the legislature was the prime mover on that, and we provided.
Yes, but it is meant to be a standing group, a standing committee that reports to the HEC, and then the HEC checks in with the legislature. So unlike other legislative tasks that have a finite end date, credit for prior learning is ongoing work.
And
the
then
HEC is responsible.
we'll have a report from the Common Course Numbering Work Group
Which is,
as well.
right.
We should probably show that, add that too. These are the new work groups.
Except that the Common Course numbering will be closed as at the completion and submission of the report. So that's the distinction.
Good. All right. With those clarifications, will enter this into the record and work with you all on getting these meetings scheduled, and appreciate your participation in all these work groups. Now, is there, under the topic of other discussion, we talked yesterday about one work product from our discussions being a letter to the presidents and their boards. In the case of OSU, U of O, and PSU, new boards to be confirmed this week. That'll probably start meeting by January or so. And kind of in sync with what Hans Bernard was speaking to us about on behalf of U of O, we need to set up a good system of communications and a good working relationship with our institutions. So that's the intention. Ben, do you want to outline what would be communicated to our institutions in this letter?
So hopefully members have this document that was just handed out that has the 5 points. So this is clearly an outline. It would be worked up into an actual letter that would come from the chair, myself, and Chief Education Officer Nancy Golden to community college and public university presidents. I should have been clear. It's the 17 and the 7 who we're proposing to address this letter to, and their boards on behalf of you and Nancy. So you can read for yourself. I mean, I think that this is designed to elicit some conversation between presidents and their boards and some feedback to this commission as it begins to delve into its work. So under point number 2, for example, you see the reference to 3 key areas of responsibility the HEC has: budget development, funding allocations, and program approvals, and the interest that we're expressing and learning from them where barriers may be, or how the current formulas for allocating state funding may inhibit their ability to serve the state's goal. The question of what state policies, so in this case not fiscal ones, but other policies may inhibit their abilities to serve the state's post-secondary goal. And then finally asking them for, under point C, an estimate of how they're contributing or planning to contribute to 40-40-20 over the next decade. This is not, I think, intended to be certainly a accountability and highly formulaic sort of mechanistic approach. I think we're just asking them to express some sense of their institution's plan for contributing to 40-40-20, allowing them to build into that estimate whatever funding, tuition, and program-related assumptions they may be using as they think about that. So again, I think it'll be important for the letter to express that this is not about not about the stick in this case, but is about engaging them in a conversation about how they're planning to contribute to 40-40-20. Number 3 asks about their missions, and I bracketed here that this is for the public universities because you may recall that the HEC's authority to approve changes to missions is only authority that exists for public universities, not for community colleges. We may, however, want to ask, just as this suggests, ask the community colleges about their mission. In fact, I would suggest, as I look at this morning, that we should ask them to tell us about their mission. But the question of, do you or your board anticipate working with the HEC to modify it, would be a question that would only be appropriate for public universities. Finally,
Hold on a second, Kirby?
Just a question on that topic. Given the impact of the private institutions, at least from my perspective, looking at the work of our subgroup, I would very much like to see what the missions of the privates are from a standpoint of just making sure that we kind of understand holistically the state resources available, working on this, on the 40-40-20 mission.
Yeah, I think
clearly are working on it, there's no doubt.
Yeah,
The
and
statistics, so.
we can certainly have similar communication with them.
Yeah, it may not be this letter, but,
Right.
but
Okay.
something to access that.
Right, I think that's a great idea. Number 4 asks about achievement compacts. You'll recall that this our commission, is responsible for advising OEIB on potential changes to the outcome measures that are in the higher education achievement compact. So we're proposing to ask here where they would recommend making changes either to the process or the measures included on those compacts. Again, the beginning of a dialogue that will be taken up by the Achievement Compacts Subcommittee that Tim described. And then finally, asking them to appoint a designee to attend meetings of the full commission. Clearly, for each of our 17 community colleges and 7 universities, it will not be a different. I mean, there may be some sharing of designees there, but want to make sure that we have ways at these meetings to engage with them or their representatives on a regular basis.
So I would like a motion to confirm our intent here with the understanding that a similar but more appropriate letter will be sent to the either the Alliance or all their member universities and colleges, and that we give discretion to our executive director to finalize this and it go out on our behalf.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Dias. Any further discussion?
I have a question.
Betty.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Is it your intent or your hope that all 7 and 17 institutions will send a representative to our meetings, or that they might designate Melody Rose or Gerald Hamilton?
So it is the latter, that
Okay.
it will not be realistic for 17 and 7 to send their own member to every meeting and work group meeting. So I'm certain there will be quite a bit of crossover there.
But we'll save seats for them if they want to.
I don't think it's going to be a problem.
David.
Yeah, I just want to reaffirm what Ben said, to make sure this isn't seen as some kind of accountability measure, but more a survey and getting input and finding out what resources they need.
And a initiation of the dialogue. So, Larry?
In that regard, I think, I like the 5 points that have been articulated. It seems like it also just would be helpful just to, because of distinctive missions, just asking the question, as you think about the role of HEC, are there additional things that we might do to be helpful to you in achieving success as you think about your future?
Great.
I assume, Kirby, you accept that as a friendly amendment? Okay. So with that clarification, all those in favor of sending the letter as outlined and as to be drafted in final form by our executive director, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, so ordered. We are now a little bit ahead of time as we prepare for our graduate level presentations on funding models. I'm wondering if it would make more sense to take a break now, come back at 5 minutes to 10, and then we can go boom, boom through those two presentations. Great. All right, we'll be back at 5 minutes to 10. So we're reconvening, and I want to remind the commission that if you remember yesterday when we got what was called the bed sheet document, the big spreadsheet with the numbers representing state funding, federal funding, and tuition funding for our institutions across the P20 continuum, those were not only a product of the allocations made by the state, but of how those dollars were distributed by the Higher Ed Board and the Board of Education in the case of community colleges. We will have those authorities as of next July for the second year of this biennium and for, even more importantly, future biennia. And so instead of the Board of Education and the Board of Higher Education for community colleges and universities crafting or redoing the funding formulas, that will be our job. I want to assure the institutions that we don't want to take precipitous action, nor do we want to take action that doesn't give institutions a considerable amount of time to adjust to whatever changes might be proposed and implemented. So with that in mind, I doubt we will see any major changes in the second year of this biennium, but we will want to make sure we're working now to put in place any changes with enough lead time for discussion and reaction for the 2015-17 biennium. So our graduate level work this morning begins with a presentation from Gerald Hamilton about how currently, under the Board of Education's policies, the dollars flow to community colleges. And it looks like we have Mary Spildy, president of Lane Community College and a member of the Oregon Education Investment Board, and I'm sorry, another colleague who I'm sure introduced himself. So welcome.
Well, thank you. Chair Nesbitt, commissioners, thanks for the opportunity. For the record, my name is Gerald Hamilton. Mary Spildy, president of Lane, has agreed to join us if there are some questions about how it affects the institutions and maybe the way we go forward in that kind of conversation. Dave Zerbe is our director of operations, and he's here to elbow me if I make a large mistake. And that's great. And you know, I feel like Duncan could be sitting here because Commissioner Wise has been on the state board that's approved all of this information. So I had the pleasure of serving in that capacity for a while. So what is the distribution formula? And it is, I don't know that it's graduate level, but it is a bit complicated and has had several factors that have been changed over the years. And so, but starting at the beginning, it's certainly a method for the state board and CCWD to allocate the community colleges funds. Its governing principles are housed in ORS 341.626 and OER 589.002.10100. So if you, as you look at the rules you have to adopt, that's where this is housed. The initial authority is housed in the rule, and the administrative and the ORS, and the administrative rule is really what the state board has approved to allow that language. And as you can see in the next slide, how the statutory language unfolds in those. Obviously, it gives the state board, under the direction of the state board, it gives the commissioner of community colleges, says shall distribute state aid to each community college, service district, and community college. Some rules around that are also that the state board has also approved over the years is no state aid for hobby or recreational courses. Yeah, so it changed several years ago. Requires proper and accurate record keeping. Big push on stability. And I'm sure Mary would agree, as the next community college president, stability was really important. You needed to know what you had from year to year, and that the full appropriation be delivered to the colleges. The next slide talks about some objectives of the formula and objectives of the rule. The State Board of Education has typically taken a strong commitment to access and equity. Equity, we'll talk a little bit more as we move forward in the presentation. But again, that was something that the community colleges have taken on and done successfully. Maintain high level of service to current students and long-term predictability and stability. Again, allowing colleges to predict and some kind of stable funding over time. What the actual formula of distribution is based on is total public resources. So it isn't that like in the old days, and those of you who have as much gray hair as I have, remember that we all were kind of funded on property taxes and so the issue of equity and the issue that the distribution formula looks at is what is the total public resources. That means the community college support fund and the property taxes of a local district. And that 100% is figured into the distribution, the appropriation and distribution. You will see colleges that have large property tax amounts in their districts, large tax bases or large tax, collect a lot of property taxes. We talk about Clatsop, we can talk about Central, who actually get a smaller percentage of the school support, community college support fund, because their property tax collection is high. So I've been asked, what is that? What's the range? And I'm off the top of my head, but it's somewhere around 12-13% up to about 35% of their funding comes from the school support fund because, again, the property taxes are high. One thing, it's always important to realize is that there's no redistribution, and that kind of comes about in the conversation I was having. We don't bring the property taxes to Salem and then give them back. I mean, it is a part of the calculation, and so there's no redistribution of property taxes, if that makes sense. It is just part of how we calculate the distribution. The next slide talks about how the goal of each college is to receive equity, and equity is defined by every college having the same total public resources, TPR, per FTE, outside of the base. And we'll talk a little bit about the base funding in a bit. That's another one of those complicated pieces that throw a monkey wrench a little bit. But full equity outside of the base, again, was reached in 2011-12. The funding, some of the components of the funding distribution, there are some categoricals that come off the top. Department of Corrections, contracts out of district, and I might explain, if you hear the term COD or contract out of a district, there are places in Oregon that do not have a community college in their location, usually in the east. One that was really close to my college in Lakeview, for example, very small community, doesn't have no community college district runs there. They're not inside of a district. So what they do oftentimes is contract with the college to give them services. And so they're called contracts out of district. That's about 0.4 million distance ed. And then the state board has allowed the commissioner's office to have a strategic fund. The strategic fund is to support, which is $3 million, to support, a little over $3 million, to support the strategic initiatives in the state, oftentimes at the discretion of the commissioner. The issue there is much of it now is spent on Career Pathways, the Career Pathways initiative. But we also have Achieving the Dream. It's supported some of the work of Achieving the Dream, and it's also supporting some of the great work that's going on around developmental ed. So it's a bit of money that's not huge, but again, it's able to support those kinds of projects and those innovations that colleges are trying to make. Very important, I think, that those innovations oftentimes don't happen for nothing. Those do cost. And the remainder goes into the distribution formula. And in this case of the 465 million, the base is about 28 million, and you can see how the rest of the numbers work out there. The Community College Support Fund is based on FTE. It's reimbursable full-time equivalent students, FTE, and that's not only for Oregon, but we do have some border state FTE. If you're in Treasure Valley, you get some FTE from Idaho. If you were in Southern Oregon, you get some FTE from California residents. So it's not a lot, but there is some of that around the edges of the state, as it were. But one FTE is 510 contact hours. So if you have a class, you do the math. Contact hours are pretty simple. So we can again compute FTE. The reimbursable programs, because again we talked about how hobby and recreational classes are not reimbursable. You can see career technical programs, post-secondary remedial, adult high school diploma programs, lower division collegiate, which is where most of the work for an associate degree is housed. That's usually the largest number on your reports. Adult basic skills, and then the workforce development programs, and that's oftentimes working with businesses and things. So those all count, and we count up the contact arrows to get FTE.
Gerald, does adult basic skills include ESL?
Yes. The issue around how do you make it predictable, and how do you not make big swings in the distribution, or how do we account for, how do we, in one way at least, account for large swings in FTE? Growing colleges or shrinking colleges or those kinds of things. And so the way to do that and to do what we call weighted and buffering the funding formula is to use a 3-year rolling average. And the 3-year rolling average, as you can see in this case, is a 30-30-40, or working from the 3rd year back, or 40-30-30, however, whatever direction you choose to go. So we're really trying to take the FTE over those 3 years and average it. And you can see we've done the average there for the state. But that again, that kind of buffers those colleges from big gains or in more the case, big losses of FTE in some respects. And so that's the kind of method that is used to accomplish that. All right, now we get to what may be a bit more graduate level than what we've had so far, and that's around the base. There is, certainly a notion that, and we'll talk a little bit later about what we call the small schools base, but this is kind of all thought about is, do colleges need a base amount of money? Is it important that a college of 500 FTE, example Oregon Coast, which is in that range, needs a base amount of money to exist, as opposed to PCC, who has enormous FTE capability? And the answer is yes. There is a base number or a base amount of distribution that needs to be made. So what the formula does to help with that, a couple of things. Number one, for the first 1,100 FTE of a college, the distribution is $720. And then if a college has not reached the 1,100, for example, Oregon Coast at 500, then they get $360 for those unrealized FTE. $360 for those the difference between 500 and 1,100. You might hear that called ghost FTE or unrealized FTE. So there is some funding for that, recognizing that there needs to be a critical mass of dollars to support the college. But everybody gets that first $1,100, so that's a base. Everyone gets that. There is an adjustment, however, on top of that for that $720, based on a set of factors for the small colleges, and the small college factors range from if you're 0 to 750 FTE, the multiplier, as you can see in the bottom down here, is 1.3513, up to a college that has over 5,000, which is 1.0. So we have another, another factor that makes sense. Another factor that helps the small colleges obtain some more revenue. That's applied to the base. That makes sense, I hope. I'm seeing some frowns and some stuff here, but we'll go back through it hopefully. So we have two base factors. We have the initial 1,100 that we're going to pay $720 for. If you don't have 1,100, you're going to get $360 for the part that doesn't come up to the 1,100. Does that make sense so far?
Where does that number come from?
What's that? The 1,100?
No, the part that doesn't come up to 1,100.
That's the difference. If you were Oregon Coast and you have 500 FTE, your college is a total of 500 FTE. The difference of $600 FTE to get to 1,100 is then funded at the $360.
Got it. Thank you.
So again, you're trying to get to that critical mass to be able to support the college, recognizing that you can't make it off just at 5. If we took total public resources times 500, you're not going to have enough money to run the facility, all right, to run the college. So then that's taken. Then the piece of that is at the 750 level is also factored by the factor I just suggested to give another small school base factor. As an example, in this example, Blue Mountain Community College took their $720,000. That's assuming that was their number base. 720,000. So they had 1,000. Let's say hypothetically they had 1,000 FTE, they got $720,000. That amount would then be factored by 1.0641 to get their actual allocation of $842,767. Those factors, I'm sorry, I know it's. Yeah,
where does that number come from? The 10641.
I'm obviously it has been something that we've worked out, and I'm not sure, I'd have to bring that back to you. I'm not sure I can tell you exactly how the factors are today. But I will do that if you'd like. But anyways, understand that the factor is higher for small schools and less for bigger schools. So what we're trying to do is make sure those small schools have that amount of money necessary to operate. Now that I've confused you, we'll move on to
A
the
small
budget.
school is one with fewer than 1,100, is that how it's defined?
Yes, typically a small school is one that's, although we do factor some of the larger schools. I mean, you know, there's a factor up to 5,000, but typically, you're right. The base is worked, everybody gets the base, but it really protects the student, the college under 1,100 FTE. Does that make, you know?
And just to be clear, the base is $792,000, right? Because that's the 1,100 times the 720. Right?
Yes, yes.
And then there's a formula that subtracts for that for schools that have less than 1,100 effectively, because you get 1,100 minus the FTE times 360 is what's subtracted.
Yeah, I wouldn't minus anything. I would say, you know, they get, a school that's less than 100, less than 1,100 would say, we're gonna get $720 for every one that we have, and then 360 for the remaining up to 1,100.
Yeah, okay.
And so I do addition instead of subtraction.
Okay.
And then, plus then they get the.
Plus they get the factor. All right. Now that we thoroughly confused you with that, we can move on to some other things here. There are, the distribution formula really looks at 4 payments throughout the year, but with that said, the state budget and really has moved the 8th payment to the next biennium. So you'll hear the discussion of, is this a 4-payment year or a 3-payment year? That's because the 8th payment is paid in July. And that was done some years ago around, I wasn't in the system at the time, but I think times were tough and they were looking some ways to move some things forward. So that 8th payment now comes in July, in the second year. Does that make sense?
Gerald, I just want to make sure that you're going to get to, when we talked about the base, but of course there are a number of schools that have more than the 1,100 FTE.
Yeah, right.
So how's they're funded above?
Right.
You're getting to that.
We'll get to that.
Okay, sorry.
That's right. That's right. I mean, the issue is, so I wanted to make clear that the issue of these deferred payment. All right. So here's how we figure, what do we do with the rest of the FTE, or actually all the FTE, because it goes, we take the total public resources available. So in 13-14, the total public resources was $369,671,63 on this slide. That is composed of both the Community College Support Fund and the property taxes available. We obviously subtract the amount.
Gerald,
from the base.
can I stop you here?
Please.
And is this skewed by the 5 payments versus 3 for this year?
This is
This is annualized?
This is annualized.
Okay.
You subtract the base, because the base comes off the top. Remember, that's why we talked about the base first. That comes off the top. And then, so you have $398 for distribution. So your total public resources without base is $3,355. Okay? So that's the amount that a college would get per FTE. Again, factoring in property taxes that they had, you know, the whole factor of property taxes and community college support fund.
So we should think of the base as the minimum needed for the infrastructure of having a community college.
I think yes, I mean, I think that characterizes the need for this. I think about it when I was in a small school, I needed extra money. I mean, to be able to do, faculty costs the same, buildings cost the same. Those things are, you know, those costs are not less because they're a small school.
I'm not really clear about why the property tax is a part of this if the property tax stays with the individual college. Why is it included in the total state available resources?
Well, I mean, if you believe in equity and you believe in equity of total public resources, then property taxes are part of
Yeah, no,
that.
I'm not arguing with that.
Okay.
I understand that part. What I don't understand is you've come up with a $3,300 figure here at the bottom
Right.
that's available per each FTE. But it might be different depending on whether you were a large property tax district or a small property tax district.
The total amount per FTE is going to be the same. What gets adjusted is the community college support fund.
Okay,
I mean, you know, we're going to adjust the community.
okay.
If you're in Central Oregon, you're going to get a smaller piece of the community college support
I
fund.
understand that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with you now.
Good.
Duncan? Just to underscore, this was an epic decision.
Oh, I can imagine.
And just to put this in context, because I think it's really important for our whole discussion of the continuum. After Measure 5, the legislature for K-12, you remember what Measure 5 did? It capped total property tax, community college and K-12 at 0.5% of property. So basically, some districts were high community college property relative to K-12, but in all cases, there was a complete cap on property. And so the legislature, in their wisdom, which was a brilliant move in the 90s, equalized K-12 funding. So now in Oregon, we were the most unequal state in the country. We became the most equal state in terms of per student funding going equally to districts, with some adjustments for small schools and so on, but basically an equalization. The board decided that given that was being done in K-12, we should do the same in community college. So we now have, and we had a celebration in 2012 when we finally equalized over a 6-year period, equalized funding per student. So we now have in K-12, community college, and higher ed, a money follows the student model. And I don't know if there are any other states that have that, but anyway, it's quite significant that you can think of the funding from the state in a dollar per student manner, whether it's per FTE, per outcome, whatever, however you want to think about it, as opposed to funding schools. So that it's just, I think, a terribly important perspective to have in terms of how the funding flows in Oregon from the state now, in determining the level of funding per student.
Thank you. You were on the board, state board.
Oh, yeah. That was.
Yes. But let's take a look at what the Community College Support Fund actually pays for FTE. So the next slide is a reflection of what that has occurred to the Community College Support Fund over the years if we exclude property tax. And you can see that in from 2009-10, and you can go back and it was even higher than that. Back, the further back you go, the number gets higher. But you can see that there was a fairly significant decline in the support fund per FTE over those years, and that was due to a couple of factors. Certainly less support fund being allocated, and of course very much larger enrollments in the college. I mean, during that period of time, there was exploding enrollments in the colleges. The economics of the state were in decline. Lots and lots of folks coming back for training and education. So you saw two factors working against each other, and pretty significant decline in what was allowed per FTE at the community college support fund level. I guess I would, we can, let me skip the next slide and come back if we can do that. So I think that I wanted to get, that kind of leads into the issue, the conversation about the next more sophisticated higher ed kind of concept of this funding formula, and that's the one of the growth management component. In 2011-13, the presidents after the approval of the state board implemented a growth management component. What was occurring was that we were growing so fast, and the FTE was being so devalued, the amount per FTE was declining so fast, we felt that there needed to be some kind of a top number. I don't like to use the word cap, but let's say a cap on how many FTE the state could fund. There was the notion that this PCC could grow really, a large number, and the small schools grow a smaller number, and it was hard to keep up. All kinds of dynamics were happening because of the enormous amount of growth that was happening in community college. So now, the state board has, and again, to provide some stability, takes a look at the total public resources, and through their authority on a biannual basis, they adjust the growth component in terms of the numbers of FTE that the state will pay for. You know, how many FTE we would, when I was at the college I was at, in that cap, that number goes up and down based on the biennium and the funding per biennium. And the college I was at, small college, we were about 1,700. And if you choose to grow above 1,700, you can do that, but you don't, those are outside of the formula. When I was down there, and I know enrollments have declined now, but I had about 400 unfunded FTE in my institution when I was president down in South. All colleges, I think, at this point probably have unfunded FTE. It's just we serve the folks that come, but you know, clearly there had to be some kind of limit, and you can on the decline of the value of an FTE, you know, in the system. So that component was put in 11-13, and wasn't the most comfortable thing I think for the state board to do, but it really was an important piece of how do we maintain stability and how do we have some kind of predictability in where we're going to go in terms of the amount that colleges get funded. Then going back the other, I just thought I'd put in a slide around the $15 million that was just allocated to special session. This outlines how that distribution you know, would occur in the last year of the biennium, certainly subject to state board and HEC approval at that point, but it's clearly a distribution that's not too complicated. There are 3 payments, because remember the 8th payment is in July, so there are 3 payments, and so we would anticipate putting out $5 million extra in the system over the first 3 payments of that next year, and the last year of the biennium. So that exhausts the slides. I know it's a bit complicated. I hope that makes it a little, the mud is a little less clear, the water's a little clearer, as it were, and we can spend some more time, we can bring in some more examples if you like, but that is an attempt at the best, a good quality overview, and we'll take questions.
Rob?
I have a few, I'm sorry. So the first is, do border state students do they pay in-state tuition or out-of-state tuition? Because you're counting FTE for them. If they're paying out-of-state tuition, it seems to me like you're getting a lot of money for those students.
Generally, there is an out-of-state component in most colleges, that there is an out-of-state tuition in most colleges.
But they also get FTE, the schools get FTE for those students.
Correct.
So they're double pay. Essentially, because you get the extra money for them being out-of-state, and then you also get the FTE payment.
That's my understanding. Yeah, I mean, some schools have varying degrees of out-of-state tuition. So let me get back to you a little bit more on that.
Okay. So I was just wondering about how the biennial growth management component has affected the access mission for the community colleges. I mean, you talked about your own institution being 400 over that amount, but doesn't that put downward pressure on institutions who are trying to meet the needs of their community by saying, well, you can, but it's going to cost you money because you're not getting FTE from the state?
Chair Nesbitt and Commissioner Fulmer, I think it's true to say that for most colleges, particularly through the enrollment surge that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, that we didn't say no to students. I mean, we expanded to accommodate the students that wanted to come to the community colleges. And that's, for example, why Lane Community College saw a 45% increase over 4 years. Now that enrollment is beginning to decline now as the economy is improving. But I think all of us really tried to accommodate the students that needed to come to community colleges. Unlike California that just cut off access, I don't think that was true in Oregon.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I don't think anyone, I mean, there was some talk about limits, but no.
So, I'm sorry, I just had one last
Go ahead,
question, which is, I didn't really understand what the negative consequences of not capping are. I mean, you talked a little bit about predictability, but if you hadn't put that growth factor in there, and you had just sort of continued to dilute the FTE, would have that had a negative repercussions on the smaller schools that weren't growing as much, or?
Chair Nesbitt, Commissioner Fulmer, the issue was, I think, and President Scully can address it as well, but the issue was the relationship between a small college's ability to grow and a large college's ability to grow. If you look at, I'll take my example because I know that. I mean, I was a small college in Southern Oregon that was growing very fast, almost doubled its FTE, but still only grew about 700 FTE. Portland PCC could grow thousands of FTE. So the question is, could the small colleges stay up in growth to the larger colleges? And was that relationship maintained unless we did that? And that was the concern that I think was echoed.
Yeah, I think that's right, that the kind of growth we've seen, really all it does is devalue the currency because the denominator of the number of students is greater and the pot was either the same or in fact declining, so we got less per student. And for areas that are in growth mode, like Central Oregon, for example, that has been stopped for a while, but I think it's turning around, Portland, it meant that the smaller colleges couldn't keep up. But it's actually true of the larger colleges as well. Lane County isn't predicted to grow as fast as Multnomah County over the next few years. So we thought that putting something in place that would at least give some relief to those colleges that aren't in the kind of growth mode that, for example, Portland is. I mean, Portland is 25% of the FTE in the state, so I mean they can eat everybody's lunch on enrollment, and so it was to try and at least mitigate those effects somewhat.
Thank you. I think it's worth noting that although we analogized to the K-12 funding formula when we talked about the equalization, a big difference is the K-12 funding formula starts with an enrollment number and then funds to the number. Now, in a bad budget period, you may end up underfunding to the number, but at least it's a more overt part of the calculation. And here you end up, I know you look at a current service level, and that assumes enrollment growth and all that, but you don't necessarily get funded to the current service level. And so you're always kind of adjusting to an underfunding of enrollment growth. Frank?
I have two questions, Gerald. One is what you're just talking about. So on the FTE funding caps for each individual community college out of our 17 community colleges, was there a mathematical formula as to what that cap would be relative to a trending FTE over X years? How did that come about, and how does that play into the future years?
Yeah, Chair Nesbitt, Commissioner Gardner, yes, there is, and it's a very complicated formula, one I didn't choose to complicate things, but there is a formula that a group of business managers work through and make a recommendation to the state board.
Okay, so for example, in Klamath Community College's case, where you're 400 beyond that capped amount,
right?
That's 30% higher than your capped amount. 400, you're at 1,500 versus the 1,100 cap amount. Is it the same 30% for every single school?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about the unrealized FTE, that would depend on how much what they did to accumulate FTE. The cap was not 1,100. I mean, in our case, one year the cap was 1,700. The next year went down to 1,652 or some number that was less. So colleges made individuals. We are 17 individual colleges with individual boards who make decisions around policy about what they're going to do. I don't know of any college, and as Dr. Philby said, that limited enrollment we are about access. But the notion of the percentage is, just a factor. I think, if I'm understanding your question right, around how many students they let them, were there above the cap.
And then my second question is back to your slide about the 15 million CCSF, the increase.
Yeah. Yes,
two or three other. So I thought that fifth payment came in July of 2014. It shows August of 2014 here.
Right. That was the. We're looking at the second year of the biennium.
That only occurs in the second year, not in the first year.
No, in a year in which there are 5 payments, you see a July payment. Is that right?
I guess I'm misunderstanding your question. In the second year biennium, there are 3 payments. So-
They happen in these months.
So these are the months the payments go out, and that's the distribution. Go ahead.
Well,
I'll refer to the man who actually writes it.
Chair Nesbitt,
I understand.
Commissioner Gillard, I pronounced that correct?
Close enough.
Okay. When this actually happened, it was at the September session, so that would have happened after the July payment. So what you're seeing is 3 payments in this year after the September special session, which would be August, October, and January. So July had already happened, and we couldn't go back. Is that clear?
Yeah, the first year of the biennium, there's 5 payments.
Right.
The first of which is from the previous biennium.
Right, it's calculated off the first.
Yeah,
It's calculated off the first.
Thank you.
Now, I understand that in the past year, there were further discussions at the Board of Education about further modifications to the formula. Can you fill us in on what's happening in that regard?
Well, and yes, and also ask Dr. Strobel to talk a little bit about that. I mean, the presidents right now are working very hard on altering the formula or suggested alterations to the formula around some outcomes or potential outcomes or some potential metrics. I think that work is progressing. They've got some philosophy statements and some foundations work that's been done that's really positive and moving in the right direction. That work continues. As a matter of fact, at the President's Council meeting in December, much of that's going to be devoted to that discussion. So I think there's good progress, and I obviously don't have a crystal ball of what's going to end up, but I think people are working very hard. Presidents are very committed to that.
So it sounds like we should be scheduling something at our January meeting, perhaps, to hear back from the
I would
president?
say that might be too soon. I would hope that you would offer them a little more time than that, but sometime, in the spring.
President
If I
Spilby?
could say, Chair Nesbitt, that there's no perfect funding formula, and there are advantages to the kind of formula that we have, particularly around access and not making selective choices about who comes to community colleges. But we're also aware that there are limitations to a formula like this, and so that's the conversations the presidents have been involved in. And I think initially we moved quite quickly in conversations with the state board to think about what other states were doing around performance-based funding and see what we could learn from that, and move quite quickly to looking at models, actual with numbers in them about what a performance-based funding formula would look like. And we've taken a little bit of a step back from that. Some of us would call it a step forward, in the sense that we're looking at the implications of, why does the formula that we have work or not? What do we want to achieve around student success and innovation, and how does a funding distribution formula play into that? And I would say that we're having a very robust discussion among the presidents, and I'm sure that group will get larger as we go on. And we're really looking at the research from other states around performance-based funding. Many states are either doing it or thinking about doing it, and frankly, the research isn't that great on the positive impacts of those kinds of formulas. So we think it's possible to do it the Oregon way and really look at research and figure out what works for us and what works for our students. And what I would say is that I don't think this conversation is going to happen in the State Board of Education, given the transition, and that is firmly on your plate to engage with us as we deal with many of the issues around the funding formula.
Well, if I could, again, I'm not sure, Mary, if you were in the room when we talked earlier, but we'll be sending a letter to you and your colleagues basically asking, we thought a good first starting point in the discussion is tell us what's not working. And so we'll be seeking that. But also, we want to make sure that we abide by the principle of a good deliberation and plenty of advance notice before we implement any change in the formula. So we're going to still have to work back and look at the timelines for rulemaking, but I would hope that we can at least get an interim report in January, and we can in January be more clear about what our deadlines are.
I think that makes sense. I think that's reasonable. I don't want to imply that we're doing nothing and not willing to share the work.
Great. Okay, well, thanks very much for this challenging math class.
Thanks for being good student.
I feel like we've just done quadratic equations, and now we're going to do advanced calculus. And we have Jay Kenton here. Welcome, Jay. To test our brains again about how we follow the money. And in this case, we're talking about the funding formula for our universities.
Thank you, Tim, and members of the HEC. It's a pleasure to be before you. I know quite a few of you. I'm not sure I know all of you, but just as a brief introduction, Jay Kenton, I'm the Vice Chancellor for Finance for the Oregon University System, and in the process of completing my 30-year career in higher education, having spent 3 years at Eastern, 3 years at OIT, 16 years at Portland State, a year at University of Idaho, and the last 8 years at the Chancellor's Office. I'm very much a product of the Oregon University System. I have my bachelor's degree in Business and Computer Science from Oregon State, a master's in higher ed administration from Oregon State, and a PhD in public finance with an emphasis on higher ed finance from Portland State University. So with me today, I wanted you to know that even though I'm retiring at the end of the year, I'm not leaving the system without resource. And I wanted to introduce Jan Lewis, who's the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Budget, and Bob Kieran, who I think you know is the Vice Chancellor or Assistant Vice Chancellor for Institutional Research. So I'm going to do most of the talking, but I wanted to have the brains here with me so they could answer your difficult questions. But with that, and I hope that I understand what you want, but I'm going to give you kind of just a brief overview of the funding model that we have used called the RAM, the Resource Allocation Model. And before I even flip the first page, I want to say something, and this is something that I learned from Jim Middleton, the president of Central Oregon Community College, and that is, this is an allocation model. And he differs that from an acquisition model, right? And one of the things in my conclusions that I'll talk about is, if the state wants to be a strategic buyer of higher education services, you might want to think about is there a way to get into an acquisition model and out of kind of an allocation model, because there's certain detriments, I think, that come with being an allocation model. So just a brief history. This model was adopted in 1999 by the Oregon Board of Higher Education and also endorsed by the state legislature. It actually replaced a model called the BAS, the Budget Allocation System. The BAS model was a very complex, I call it a black box, because the inputs were state appropriation and tuition. There was a whole set of complex simultaneous equations that took place inside the box, and then it spit out allocations by campus. Nobody understood it, nobody trusted it, and eventually it became its demise. The RAM allocates only state funding using what I call a more transparent approach. You can demonstrate it on the back of an envelope very quickly to faculty members and other constituents in higher ed. And institutions are allowed to keep all the tuition they generate. That was a key decision that was made in 1999. The RAM model was the result or the product of Governor Kitzhaber in his second term, I believe it was, as governor, his higher task force on higher education and the Oregon economy. I actually did my dissertation on the RAM, so I could talk to you all day. I'll try to be brief, though. I know.
See, it is graduate school.
The general fund in the RAM model is to be allocated using two mechanisms. The first is called the enrollment-driven part, and it's about 60-some% of the money goes, and it follows the students literally on enrollment. We'll talk about that more in a minute. And then the second part, the other 30 or 40%, comes through what's called targeted programs for research, public service, or other elements. So running the RAM, we have this little kind of jigsaw puzzle, It requires the following pieces. The first is how much general fund did the legislature appropriate? And we get separate appropriations or designations for public university support funds. And again, those are funds for legislative initiatives and enrollment funding, state programs. And this is a new vernacular used with the 13-15 budget. State programs, which are largely public service programs. The statewide public services, OSU, the Ag Experiment Station Extension Service and Research Lab. And then debt service is a separately appropriated amount. The second piece we need to know is what students are fundable under this model. And as you can imagine, when you're allocating state tax resources, you want the bulk of that money to go to Oregon residents. You know, it's kind of the return on your tax payments over the years to have your children go to college in Oregon at a reduced price. But in addition, there are other categories that the board has deemed to be fundable. And we have at Eastern, it used to be all students at Eastern were fundable. It was such a small school and struggled mightily. We had all students. Now we've changed it to Oregon and Washington students attending EOU are fundable. Even though they're non-residents, by definition, they are fundable under the RAM. All PhD students are fundable. Part of the reason was there was a lot of discussion when this model was adopted, and many of the provosts felt PhDs tend to stay in the state in which they graduate. And so that was put in there. Graduate assistants. When you get a graduate assistantship at any of our institutions, because the institution effectively pays your tuition, we automatically change you to a resident, and therefore you become fundable. WICHE, some exchange programs. We also put senior citizens in auditing. We have a part-time fee policy. I think most of our institutions have now kind of eliminated that, but it used to be if you were a casual student attending Portland State, they didn't validate your residency, you know, because of the process that would require, the paperwork, etc. And they wanted people to be able to drop in easily for a class or two, and they were fundable. Supervising teachers that supervise our student teachers doing work in the schools, they get resident, or they are considered fundable students for purposes of the RAM. Again, Armed Forces personnel, I believe that's the result of some statutes that passed in the last session. And members of recognized Oregon tribes are also fundable in the RAM.
Jay?
Yep,
Ben,
go
have a
ahead,
question.
sorry.
Yeah, as you proceed, Jay, or maybe you can just address it now, which parts of any of this are statutory and therefore out of our purview versus rule, and then presumably ultimately the HEC's purview?
That's a good question, Ben. I would say, I don't believe many are statutory other than the veterans, although Jan's probably a better expert on this than
I think that we can get that information for you pretty quickly because it is a small group of students, including the ones recently passed regarding the non-resident veterans that now have a fast track to getting tuition assessed at a lower rate. These usually, the statutory piece usually come in the form of remissions. So I think it's a handful we're talking about.
Okay. And
easily identified for you.
my question is sort of a general one about everything that we're going to hear here today as well, relative to how the allocations are made. So
I don't believe that the fundable is statutory. The fact that they get to pay resident tuition is, the idea behind fundable is the students that pay resident tuition are not paying enough to pay for their instruction, so they get state appropriation. So you want to put state dollars along with those paying resident tuition, but I don't think it's statutory that you have to fund those at a certain level.
Most of what I'm going to talk to you about today is not statutory. I don't believe. Most of it is board policy, or it could be, residency is determined in our administrative rules, things like that. But I believe this body would have the ability to change most any and all of the things I'm going to talk to you about.
Thank you.
Just stepping back to the state programs and stuff, that's pass-through money, right? I mean, we couldn't change the allocation of money that's allocated to particular things by the legislature.
Right.
Right. I mean, we can only change things related to the public university support funding, not to those other paths.
That is probably true, Rob. I would defer to somebody like Bill McGee, who's nodding his head affirmative, or, you know, it's, I have had LFO threaten me from time to time that if I didn't allocate things the way they wanted, they would make it statutory, but we have had a good enough relationship over the years that they haven't had to do that by and large, so. But, I mean, if they feel strongly about it, you'll know, I think, from the legislative body.
And can I just add on that point that this recent change in how they group our allocation, I think recognize the fact that that group that's within state programs is intended to be those programs that the legislature cares about and wants to specifically identify funds for.
Okay, the next piece of the puzzle is actually having a projected enrollment. We allocate the initial budget at the beginning of the year based on projections of fundable students. And then at the end of the year, and I'll talk about this in a minute, we do a settle-up calculation. In most years, there have been some years in big downturn years where budgets were cut that we didn't do this, but by and large, we settle up for actual enrollment at the end of the year, which requires, in many cases, a reallocation, clawing money back from institutions that didn't hit their projections, giving the money to institutions that exceeded their projections, etc. But the RAM relies on fundable student credit hours by campus, by course, and that CIP stands for Classification of Instructional Program, so U.S. Department of Education vernacular. And we have assigned each zip code by level to a cost category, be it low cost, medium cost, or high cost. And they vary. You know, you might have a lower division program in English that's low cost, but at the graduate level it may be medium cost for various reasons. English may not be a good example of that, but they vary based on how, when this model was originally set up, how the peers costs were in national cost studies of like institutions. Okay, so we look at that, we project it, and in essence, in your mind's eye, if you could picture a 12-cell matrix, and on one axis you have this low, medium, and high cost. On the other axis you have lower division, upper division, master's, and doctorate. That's largely how the RAM works. In each one of those 12 cells, there's then a capitation rate of how much money an institution would get for a full-time equivalent student in that cell. Okay, and that's a gross simplification. We actually have a few more cells than that, and I'll talk about that for the professional programs in law, vet, med, and pharmacy. But Bob actually does a projection every spring, working with the campuses. We run what's called a Markov chain model that looks at how many freshmen do we retain to be sophomores, how many sophomores do we retain to be juniors, etc., looking at kind of those historical retention levels. We look at the high school pipeline, you know, the number of graduates coming out of high schools. We talk to the institutions and kind of reconcile. They may be mounting new programs in new discipline fields, and Bob runs a projection, he sends it to the campus, we reconcile with them, and then we have an agreed upon projection that drives that initial allocation. You can see we determine FTE differently depending on whether you're an undergrad, a master's student, or a doctoral student, and those are pretty much nationally normative data. Then to determine the cell values, at the highest and most simplistic level, you take that enrollment funding state appropriation as your numerator, and your denominator is the projected enrollment, and that yields that cell value. That's a very simplistic approach, but in essence, that's what occurs, right? And then we know by projecting the enrollment in each one of those categories, we just multiply out then, you know, what that should be. When the RAM model was first established, and Bob actually can talk better about this than I can, his office did studies of higher ed costs nationally to assign those programs to cost category, high, medium, or low. And when you think about that, the way I think about it is, sociology faculty have low salaries, probably the lowest paid discipline at a university. But if you think about, for those of you that went to college, you know, those Soc 101, 201 classes you used to sit in with 300 or 400 other people in an auditorium. And you think about, that's a pretty low-cost program, right? We have one faculty member, maybe with a graduate assistant, teaching 200 or 300 people at a time. Pretty low cost. On the other end of the spectrum, engineering or science, you have only a certain amount of lab spaces. You have very specialized equipment. You have very high-cost faculty, because many of those faculty could work in industry and command fairly high salaries. And so those are high costs. So that's generally how this works, but Bob, I don't know if you want to elaborate.
No, that works.
This is good, okay. So when we first started, we asked the legislature to fund the model at those normative costs of our peers. And we got within 93% of that number. However, every year thereafter, that number has dropped off, and we're presently, I believe, below 50% of what we believe those peer costs would be. And I call that the tragedy of the commons, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute, but this next slide shows you in 1999, these were the cell values. Again, the top 3 rows and 4 columns would be that 12-cell matrix I asked you to think about in your mind's eye. And you can see the black numbers there, what it started at. The red number is what it currently is. And again, I'll talk to you about why that happened, but you can see there's been great erosion of the value that we pay, even though inflation, and these are not inflation-adjusted dollars, these are just stated in real numbers, so you can see it's dropped off. The next slide kind of summarizes that, and this is what happens in what I'll call the tragedy of the commons. Our fundable FTE in '99 was 50,000. Today it's 64,000. It's a 27% increase in the number of students we're funding with state resources. If you look at the funding for enrollment, it actually declined by 12.8% in the aggregate. And that dropped the average cell values by 31%. You know, interestingly, when the RAM model was adopted in 1999, one of our provosts wrote a paper entitled The Tragedy of the Commons. And it basically suggested that we should form a cartel and only serve a certain number of residents, because the more we served, we are going to erode the value we would get. And so we should all have a cartel and say, well, we're only going to serve this many. But in good faith, I think our institutions have tried to serve any and all qualified resident students, regardless of the funding we got from the state, and this has been a tragic outcome of that, in my opinion. Oops. The next slide shows you another outcome of this, and that is, this is just looking at the change in fundable and change in non-fundable FTE by campus over that 15-year period of time. The interesting thing is you can see we're actually growing more in non-fundable students. Why is that? They pay a lot more money. And you know, frankly, based on the mathematics today, we're losing money on average on every resident, and campuses are forced to go get non-residents who in many cases pay 2+ times the cost, and they're using that profit on the non-residents to subsidize additional state students. But it's kind of tragic what has happened in that regard. And that's not just a strategy, by the way, employed in Oregon. It's starting to be a national phenomenon as other states have, experienced economic issues with the recession and their state funding per student has dropped. We're now seeing a lot more competition in that non-resident student space. So all the pieces come together. Again, I told you we use the projection, do the initial allocation. So campuses also use this as only an allocation, or they use this to kind of acquire money. They don't necessarily allocate the money the way the RAM dictates. Many of our campuses have gone to, I'm going to forget the name of it, but it's a budgetary theory where each tub's on its own bottom. They allocate to tuition out to departments. They allocate the general fund that they've acquired out to departments, and they, so not everybody uses the RAM in exactly the same way on the campus. They use it as a way they get their budget, and then they have internal processes to allocate it to departments and different initiatives at their campus. And as I mentioned earlier, the actual enrollment data at the end of the year is used to settle up, where we look back and say, geez, you projected to have this enrollment, you actually had a little less or a little more, and we're going to rebalance, if you will, that allocation at the end of the year. Not a popular thing if you're on the losing side of that, very popular if you're on the winning side, as you can imagine. This next slide, I just wanted to give you an overview of the general fund by program over this 13 or 14 year period of time. And the big thing you'll notice if you look at the blue, the dark blue, enrollment driven was 69% of the money in 1999-2000. It's now 59%. The big slice in there that has grown is debt service, right, on capital projects. I mean, it's grown from, 3% to 12%. And you see the others have stayed roughly the same. I mean, they've increased by 1 or 2%. And that, too, has contributed to an erosion of this funding per student, right? So it's not just the fact that we have more students. The money's being used differently. For us to grow, in many cases, it requires we need increased capacity. To get that capacity, we typically seek bonding from the state to build more buildings, to educate more students, to try to attain the 40-40-20 goals that we're all striving for. These next few slides, I just wanted to give you a sense. I mean, our campuses do care about costs and have been actively managing their affairs to try to keep their costs down. This first slide actually looks back to 1996, and it tracks the average cost of instruction over that time. You can see that it's grown by 55%, but CPI alone during that time was 45%. And frankly, this is a time where benefit costs have been, PERS, PEP, you've read about them in the paper, they've grown substantially. Some of our cost drivers have grown at a lot higher rate than CPI. But this is, I believe, a tribute to our campuses being efficient with their resources and trying to keep their costs down to the extent that's feasible. This next slide shows you these average costs by institution. And as the RAM model would suggest, we have some campuses have a really high cost discipline mix. Look at OIT, for example. They, with engineering, healthcare, very high cost discipline mix. Oregon State has a high discipline mix. U of O in this case has more money, to be honest. They have more non-resident students. They have more money to spend. But as you read recently in the report that you might have read about in the paper from their provost, they spend, even at this rate, a lot less than other AAU schools that they are comparing themselves with. So I think we've done a good job on cost control generally, etc. The next slide shows you what's happened in the last 11 or 12 years with funding generally. The purple line on this slide is average resident tuition for grad and undergrad students. The green line is average RAM funding per FTE. And the orangish line is a sum of those two products. And then it compares it to the average cost of instruction that I just showed you. And you can see that gap is widening. More and more, as we serve more students, as we dilute those cell values, etc., the spread between our costs and what institutions are given to serve resident students is growing. And that's not a good thing if we want to try to achieve 40-40-20. We've got to figure out a way to address that issue. So conclusions. The RAM actually was premised on competition between public universities being a good thing, kind of a survival of the fittest mentality. A lot of people don't know that. That was actually in the Governor's Task Force report on higher ed and the economy. And the academy really struggles with that somewhat, but it has been what it is. It's a zero-sum game, so growth at one campus can actually widen their share. If you're thinking about cutting a pie, they're growing. If you're growing at a faster rate than the average, your slice of the pie is getting bigger. And it's coming at the expense of the other campuses. Okay, so it's created a bit of a dynamic in that regard. The tragedy of the commons I talked about. Incentives are also carved out. We've had incentives for increased retention, improved graduation, especially oriented to low-income, rural, and diverse students. And we carved that out of enrollment funding as well. Obviously, campuses have had to raise tuition substantially. I think we sent you data on that. And tuition has increased by a lot. And it's really interesting, if you go back to 1990, prior to the passage of Ballot Measure 5, what happened after that. It was remarkable in a sense. I mean, not in a good way, but the increases have been just remarkable. I talked to you about it's an allocation model, not an acquisition model. It's hard for campuses even to know what they're going to get for resident students doing business this way. And so it's hard to plan around those things. But again, I think everybody's doing the best they can. And we are, I believe, serving all qualified residents who apply to our academies. Targeted program approach may dilute enrollment funding. And I want to just end with a little story. A few years ago, when our budget was declining, I want to say 07, we talked to our board about, well, where should we cut? And most felt we should cut targeted programs. They're more public service, and we should preserve the enrollment funding. We should preserve the ability for students to get a low-cost education. But when we took that to the legislature, they said, no, we want to do the opposite. They actually cut enrollment funding to keep those targeted public service programs growing or from less cuts. So it was an interesting lesson to me in terms of priorities. Many of those public service programs have legislative advocates, as you can imagine. I mean, they're good programs, don't get me wrong, but you know, our board, when they looked at it, thought enrollment should be primary and those things should be secondary. The legislature felt the other way. So that concludes my remarks. Our contact information is here. We're happy to answer questions. We provided a lot of materials in your packet. There's actually a big spreadsheet. I think it's, do you have a copy of that? Yeah, this big spreadsheet actually shows the RAM grouped, and you know, we have line items, and each line item is explained in your materials. We'd be happy to answer questions about that.
Thank you. We were originally scheduled to have until 11:15. How about we say 11:20? So we have 15 minutes for questions. I know there are going to be a lot, so let's try and keep our questions succinct and the answers concise. Rob.
A comment first, Jay. When we were given the spreadsheet for the RAM model, it includes links to several other, and we need those other sheets as well in order for us to actually make sense out of that, because there are references to cells in other sheets that we need to deal with. So if we could just get in our materials the entire complement of those, it will actually allow us to look at all that data.
Well, this one was sent to you in error. That was an extra Excel tab that wasn't it. So I don't know if you're referring to that.
No, I wasn't. I was referring to the master RAM model sheet that had all the cells in it. That had, when you asked to update the links, when Excel asked to update the links. Well, you can say no, but then you don't have the information on all those other ones.
Okay, we'll fix that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So the two questions that I had, I'll try and make this quick. The first one was about the assertion that was made by the schools about PhD students staying in state, and that was a good reason to give them in state. Did you follow up and measure that to see that that was actually true? I mean, I believe they asserted that, but I mean, we're paying the in-state tuition for all PhD students. Do PhD students in fact stay in state?
We just recently matched with employment department data, and I'm actually still going through it because the employment department data is pretty complex. And at least 40% are employed in the state or they're receiving pay. When we get to doctoral students too, one of the problems with matching with employment is that we only know who's on payroll, so we don't know who is self-employed. And that's more likely to be the professional and doctoral students. So we're cautious about using that. But we're getting into that, and as we continue to combine data in an SLDS type deal, we'll have more information on that for you.
Okay, and the other questions, very quickly, you may actually want to answer this one as well, is about the pipeline. I noticed that you're looking at K through 12. Do you look at community college, estimated community college transfers as well? Because, I mean, part of our charge is to improve articulation and to make sure there's a seamless transition. I'm wondering if that goes into your costing.
It does, but not mathematically. We have flags and switches that we can set, and I always talk to my community college partners to see what their enrollment has been. And so I set what I think is an increase or a decrease from prior years. We usually work off of 3 years worth of history to give us a good concept. Then with the discussion, we can adjust that. Then we meet with the campuses. And I also have a complete set of applications and admissions reports. When we go out, it's usually in May or June. So the research universities have a pretty good idea about who they've accepted for fall term by then. So we can be fairly accurate.
Thank you.
But that's an excellent question, actually, Rob, because I believe it used to be that our largest source of new students were first-time freshmen. And I think a couple of years ago that changed, and now, is it not true that our largest source of new students is transfers?
It's transfers, yes, not just community college transfers,
okay,
but also
so-
transfers.
Neil and then Lamar.
Jay, good to see you.
Good to see you.
And by the way, Jay's retiring December 31st, so that's going to be a loss in the Oregon University system. But he's still hopefully going to live in Oregon, and we can pick his brain. We know where you'll be living. Could you explain briefly what the small school subsidy is?
Yeah, there's multiple elements to the small school subsidy. If you look at this big spreadsheet, I'm going to talk about basically everything on lines 13 through 20. And when the RAM model was developed, it was determined, and I'm not sure how scientifically determined this was, but it was determined that 7,500 FTE was where you kind of hit economies of scale at 7,500 students. So some of these line items are driven by how many students below 7,500 are you, and they get adjusted each year based on where your actual enrollment is. Some of this was to be regional funding. Most of those institutions have a regional mission of serving the broader needs of the region. But you can see that's $9.2 million in this year. Is that right?
There's also the pension, that's
Oh, yeah.
7,500.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Line 10 actually has that $7,500 adjustment. So it's actually about $20 million a year, $40 million a biennia that goes to the small schools to try to underpin their finances. They struggle mightily, and in fact, they're currently struggling. 3 of our regional campuses, Western, Eastern, and Southern, actually lost enrollment this year. And 2 of them, Southern and Eastern, the swing in their enrollment was like 9%. Eastern was expecting to be up 2% and actually was down 7%. Southern was expecting to be up 3% and was down 5.5%. So those are large swings that really impact their finances significantly.
And Jay, where does that $20 million per year then come from?
It's state general fund.
State general fund.
Yeah.
And so we call it a small school subsidy because the larger schools with the higher enrollment then don't receive those funds.
That's correct. And in fact, in most cases, those have been direct ask of the legislature and have been approved specifically for that purpose.
Lamar.
Yeah, where does philanthropy fit into all of this? And
No, it's a great question. So most philanthropy is oriented either to capital. In many cases, the way Article 11G of the Oregon Constitution is written, it requires institutions have a 1-for-1 match with state-backed bonds. And so we may have a $50 million capital project, philanthropy will fill $25 million, the state will sell bonds for the other $25 million to fund that building project. Much of our philanthropy also goes off to scholarships, so student scholarships, or to fund what are called endowed chairs for faculty to, very little of our philanthropy goes to day-to-day operating expenses. In most cases, when people give money to our institutions, they earmark that they want it to go to student scholarships, they want it to go to a building project, they want it to go to an endowed chair. In that case, it does actually help defray the expenses of employing a faculty member. But for the most part, philanthropy is an added kind of supplement of quality, if you will, is how I think about it, or access for students, etc. Most of the philanthropy, as you can imagine, occurs at Oregon State and at University of Oregon. Portland State's a pretty young school. It's getting better at philanthropy, but it runs a very distant third to those first two. And then at the small schools, they do some, but it's hard. And part of it is OSU and U of O have been around since the Civil War roughly, and they have turned generations of students, if you will, and it's usually on the death of someone that you'll get big bequests and wills and things like that, and that drives a lot of the philanthropy. But it doesn't really help day to day in terms of operating expenses that much.
Kirby?
Jay used to do a pie chart for us on just where the money came from, in other words, what the amounts are, and how much came from research, how much came from tuition, how much came from the state, how much came from for the different institutions. Can you give me a sense of what that looks like today?
Yeah, I could send that to you. I apologize. I didn't know what focus you wanted me to take on this presentation. I tried to focus on the RAM, but we're about a $3 billion a year enterprise. $3 billion, and about $1 billion of that's tuition and fees. Probably about, and some of these numbers, please don't quote me on them, but research is probably $400 million, maybe $450 million. The state is $300 or $400 million a year. And then there's a lot of federal financial aid and other, capital things that kind of fill that in. But I will be happy to send you those sources of funds totally. It really varies by campus too. The other thing, that we've talked a lot about with the legislature is what percent of each campus budget comes from the state. At the University of Oregon, it's single digit. It's like, 5 or 6%, depending how you count it, comes from the state. The other 94% is what I call self-generated, or comes, from students, etc. And that has fallen remarkably over the last 20 or so years since the passage of Ballot Measure 5, and we've had to raise tuition, we've had to seek outside funding, etc. And so it's some of our smaller campuses are obviously much more dependent on the state. They don't have as many opportunities to do research or to bring in philanthropy and things like that. But so they may be 50% state funded, and so it's obviously much more important to them. But that's just the way it is.
If I could follow up on that, to the extent that a university recruits a lot more out-of-state students who pay higher tuition, the percentage of state support is going to look smaller.
Absolutely.
And what about research dollars? Is that part of that equation?
Research dollars are in that equation. Athletics or auxiliary activities. U of O's athletic department is probably north of $100 million enterprise today, right? It's a big business.
So that calculation, Jay, is different than the one you showed on slide 12 in your slide, which is the cost of instruction, average cost of instruction per student. Because that doesn't include a lot of those things, right?
Do not include those other things. This is only our costs of our faculty, prorated cost of our facilities, prorated costs of our student services, et cetera, in that slide.
So I would hope that we could get a good set of apples to apples comparisons going, because we hear so many percentages and numbers quoted, and they apply to so many different pots of money.
And when I calculate, I even include need grant money that institutions get, you know, the debt service funding that they get on their bonds, you know, things like that. And so I think sometimes our institutions simplify and just talk about what they're getting in operating support. I tend to look at it more holistically, but I don't know which of us is right. I don't think either of us are wrong, actually. It's just a different way of looking at it.
Kirby, I'm sorry, do you have another question?
The only other comment I would make is at least, you know, I'm going to hit the research button again, just because I feel it's so absolutely critical to the instruction in our institutions, and also in the community colleges, by the way, so I'm not leaving them out, having done a fair amount of work on all of the institutions around academic excellence and academic development and just the student success model. But one of the things that comes in with those research dollars is things that defray the administration dollars within our institutions. So I think we've got to be really careful as we start down this line. Also, the comment on graduate students and the impact that they have in getting these research dollars. And since last I looked, and I haven't seen it recently, but our faculty in our institutions are in the top 10 in the nation of research dollars per faculty. So in Oregon, research dollars make a huge difference. And unless that's changed, Jay, but it's pretty impressive stuff.
It is still that way.
And then another number to just keep in mind if you're thinking about that is 7 out of 10 wildly successful companies come out of research organizations and universities. So the really successful companies, the ones that really go crazy, are almost always start within an institution.
It's true.
Jay, you demonstrated the difference in low, medium, and high-cost programs, and even if you look just within lower division, it's almost a range of almost 100%, one being twice, the high end being almost 2x the low.
Right.
From my time on the higher ed board, I know there was one example from Oregon Institute of Technology where they got approval to charge higher tuition for a high-cost program. It was the health professionals. Is that a practice which is spreading, or?
It absolutely is a practice of spreading. We call it differential tuition, and it's not just in Oregon. It's a national phenomenon. That if you major in engineering, if you major in business, it could be related to the program cost, or it could be related to the salary that you will command as a graduate of that program. But we have numerous examples of differential tuition today. Our tuition structure has also changed. It used to be, when I went to college, back in the dark ages, that if you took 12 to 21 credits, you paid the same price. That was called a tuition plateau. Those plateaus are largely gone. We now charge on a per credit hour basis. By and large, Oregon State has a small plateau, but I believe is actually in the process of eliminating it. And so these are all things that unfortunately we've had to do, just out of financial necessity. In many cases, the provost didn't want us to do that because it took away the ability of a student to kind of sample coursework in non-major fields and get a more well-rounded education, but it's the grim realities of the finances.
Jay, thank you, and Jan and Bob, thank you for your presentation. We hope to call on your expertise in our work going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, and just one final remark, if I may, Tim, and that is I wanted to offer that if you would like us to run the RAM for next year, we would be happy to do that, and at least that way you'd have a benchmark starting point for it. But that will require Bob updating his enrollment projections and Jan and others running the model. But it's not a lot of work. We'd be happy to do that, and we're happy to help you in any other way we can make a smooth transition. Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to invite Doris McEwen to join us. Doris is on the staff of the Oregon Education Investment Board and will be presenting to us on the equity lens adopted by that board. Welcome, Doris.
Thank you.
And I want to remind the commissioners, this is an action item. We'll be taking action on the policy.
Good morning. I hope the pause has caused you an opportunity to take a breath. I know you've been going all morning. Also, I thought I was going to be between you and lunch, but I see I'm between you and adjournment. That's even more difficult. I'm Doris McEwen, and I am staff with the Oregon Education Investment Board, the Director for Curriculum and Instruction. And this morning, I'd like to share with you a little bit about the development of the equity lens, the adoption of the lens, and then maybe point to some things that you might want to consider as a higher education coordinating commission, and then in recommending that you adopt the lens. So our Chief Education Officer, as most of you know, is Dr. Nancy Golden, and we're pleased to have her on board. The question for all of us really becomes, what is equity? And I'm going to just have you sit with that as we go through the presentation, the question of what is equity. We are now into 2013, which is the 50th anniversary of the Dr. Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech. And so it's very appropriate that we consider and reconsider and reposition ourselves with equity. The OEIB was created basically to put together a system that would shepherd students from birth through the college process. And so in looking at Senate Bill 909, you see that what we're trying to do is to get a unified public education system that includes our post-secondary studies. Our executive director, he's looking down right now, but I wanted him to see this picture.
That was ages ago.
But I figured I would put that up there to remind him of his youth, but also to congratulate him on his position as executive director for the HEC. So with HEC's charge to look at advising and assisting the OEIB to recommend policies that improve higher education, to recommend and encourage student success and completion of initiatives, removing barriers for on-time completion, and then assuring that the 40-40 in the 40-40-20 goal, aspirational goal, is actually met. When I saw this photo, I put this photo in because the vision of 40-40-20 can't be actualized until we have a system in place where every child is successful. And I call children at the post-secondary level children, since mine are 40 and 37, and I still call them children. But when we have these young people turn around, we want to see a population that mirrors the state of Oregon. So that's our intent here, is to mirror the state of Oregon. So what's the OEIB equity lens, and why was it developed? Our subcommittee members are listed there for your review. I'm not going to take a lot of time on that slide. I just wanted you to be able to see who they are, other than to say that the Equity and Partnerships Subcommittee is the only subcommittee of the Oregon Education Investment Board that the governor actually sits on. And so we're very pleased that he takes that commitment of equity so seriously.
And Doris, do you want to note the appointment today of...
Oh, yes, we have designated from our commission Ramon Ramirez, who couldn't be with us today, but was with us yesterday, as our liaison member to that committee.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. So the charge to our subcommittee is basically to take a look at how do we ensure that equity and partnerships are a part of our process. So we've looked, for example, over the past year at equity and excellence through an equity lens. We've looked at how are students who are disadvantaged or marginalized by the system being incorporated into the discussions, and then how do we engage our public as we look at 20 as an education process. So in terms of looking at the equity lens itself, it was widely reviewed. It took us about 6 months to develop the lens itself until it got to final adoption. And some of you around the table had an opportunity to actually take a look, either as an individual or as an organization, at the lens through the process and give us feedback, because we felt it was very important that we get community feedback on an equity lens. So I appreciate those of you who've already had a chance to review that. We also put together an advisory committee that we tried to have as broad representation as possible that could also vet the lens and provide recommendations to us. And that consisted of 10 community members throughout the state, representing various segments of our population. We also did an outreach to community-based organizations. We did a high school class with one of the schools in Portland to actually teach the lens. And I thought that was a really successful process. I think whenever you go to a high school and teach a class and they ask you to actually come back, then you've made some kind of impression on them. And when I went back the second time, they actually asked me to come to graduation. So I figured that was kudos for the lens as well. They gave particular feedback around, so what? What does this mean for me as a student, and how do we operationalize the lens? How are you really going to consider my voice as you look at equity across the state? So that was really important for us, and then we had invited testimony. We actually had students from it was the PSU inquiry class at Roosevelt High School, and some of those students actually came and testified to the Oregon Education Investment Board. We also had their classmates come as well. So some people will tell me that I did that kind of as a ploy, because how are you going to say no to a group of kids sitting in the audience? But the fact is, the equity lens has been very widely vetted, and I wanted to show you that. The equity lens format, you have a copy of that, I hope, in front of you. And you'll see that it's set up with a preamble, with belief statements, with purpose, with a case for equity, with addendums, and then the features of the lens and definitions. Now, we're not going to take time during this presentation to go through each one of those, but I do want to say to you that if when you look at the preamble, for example, you're really looking at what's the vision for equity and excellence in the state of Oregon. The research tells us that $3.1 billion will be put back into the Oregon economy when students of color and in poverty successfully graduate from our school systems. And that's a significant contribution that we must not overlook. So the primary focus on our equity lens is really race. And I want to call that out specifically because as we received feedback on our equity lens, we received it from various populations. And we wanted to make sure that the equity lens itself was not diluted or diverted. So we intentionally focused the equity lens on race. When we look at the belief statements about the equity lens, when I went back the second time to present the class, to present the information to the high school class, I asked them to call out for me what are the key words that the Oregon Education Investment Board is actually asking you to believe in. What are they asking you to key in on? So they pulled out these key words that are represented in red. They talked about the moral imperative. They talked about language being an asset, the fact that all students are assets. They talked about a welcoming inclusivity, meaning our special education populations and the range of our diversity. They talked about meeting the needs of our diverse populations, and Anya, you can see for yourself where we are with those. And those key words are important because really, the equity lens is about the beliefs. It's an opportunity to come together as an Oregon Education Investment Board around what do you really believe. So if you're going to recommend strategic investments, what do you believe in your hearts that equity should consist of? So the belief statements are really the core of the equity lens, along with the questions that we ask people to consider as they're vetting the lens. The next session is a case for the equity. At the time, T20, we now refer to that as birth through college. And the fact that we all have a shared destiny. We are bound by our humanness. And the intention is to really look at what are those systemic policies that we have that we need to make sure we come together on to eliminate institutional racist practice and other practices that are hindering our students from moving forward. So there's an active investment in structures that will lead us to making sure that this 40-40-20 is actualized, that it's, because I believe it's doable, it's not just aspirational, and it's not just the governor's goal, it is the people of Oregon's goal, and that we individually have to take responsibility for that. So you'll see the purpose of the equity lens stated next, and you'll see that it is an articulation of shared goals. Go back. I'm too far away from the screen, so I apologize for that. So articulated shared goals, the fact that the investments themselves have to be particular and strategic, that there are accountability structures, that there's a systems outcome that we're expecting in terms of resource allocation, investments, hiring, and professional learning. When we looked at the basic features of the lens, we looked at the objectives, and you'll see those in there. And you'll see the questions. Now, the questions are really what guides the equity policy. So as the Oregon Department of Education, for example, their board adopted the lens. So as they developed their administrative rules, they actually incorporated into administrative rules these questions. And what the questions do then is frame the conversation for the RFPs that are being led from the Department of Education. So everything that the various adopting agencies are doing are through the lens of looking at these questions, which is an opportunity to really focus on disaggregation of data. So not lumping data into one collective group, but rather what are individual groups doing in terms of their achievement, and how are we as organizations doing with that. So the next several slides you see are really looking at those questions that we ask people to consider. So what I'd like to do is to go over, I'm going to skip past the definitions for sake of time. I want to talk a bit about what is equity, and that's the definition that the subcommittee came up with, and that's the one that we use as part of our lens. The other piece is that what then would HEC's role be in equity? So looking at adopting the OEIB equity lens or an equivalent, something that will help you guide your belief systems or your belief system around equity, so that there's a consistent language. Because as we look for language for the OEIB, it was a common conversation. So now when we talk about equity, everyone's on the same page. When we talk about all of those features that fold into the equity lens, we're all on the same page as a board. The other thing I've already mentioned is to disaggregate the data to view disparities and to be able to make decisions that will mitigate those disparities. And then holding colleges and universities, the system, so to speak, accountable for equitable practices. And we know that many of our organizations already have equity practices in place. We want to have an opportunity to have them share their reports, keep them accountable for that equity, and move forward. So as a new HEC, the new HEC is staffed, for example. I know that Ben has been very, very conscious about making sure that new staff is representative in terms of its diversity. Some of the other questions might be, how is the cultural responsiveness represented in our teacher licensing program, in our university college classroom, in our administrative practices? How are academic programs themselves being culturally responsive? How is disaggregated data being used to inform the transformation decisions in Achievement Compact collaborative conversations? How's the budget being developed to guarantee more students from underserved populations access to college? How are representatives from communities of color being engaged in the decision-making process of HEC, either through advisory staff positions or other means? And what are the institutional racism practices that must be addressed for HEC to be successful in ensuring the accomplishment of the 40-40-20 goal? What equity training is being pursued for HEC and for HEC staff? And then I'd like to just end by saying thank you, and with a quote from Lorenzo Pope. Some of you know Lorenzo. He says, equity is the road to equality. There's a distinction between equity and equality, but equity is the road to get us to equality. So I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to briefly and in a rush way share the lens and then ask if there are any questions.
Thank you, Dr. McEwen, for a very eloquent and informative presentation. It resonates with a lot of the discussions we had yesterday in our planning meeting, and I personally appreciate the focus at the end for this commission to not only adopt the policy, but to use it in the ways you've outlined. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Other questions from the commissioners?
Well,
yes, Carmen.
Dr. McEwen, I just want to say thank you for all your hard work on the lens, and I just want to say that it was a very vetted process, and dozens of organizations, ours included, was a part of the deliberation and the development of the language. So it was a very inclusive process. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about why the subcommittee and advisory folks decided to focus on race and ethnicity, and how it was a process of looking at several different factors and why it ended up there.
Okay. One of the things that, after all the research that we did, we realized that students of color, regardless of where they are generally also going to be students in poverty, number one. But the other piece is the quote, so to speak, that the rising tide lifts all boats. Is that the way it goes? It's something like that. Because I never remember things like that, those quotes, unless I write it down. But the fact is, when we focus on race, we know, for example, that students of color, particularly African American children, our Latino children, our Native American children, are not performing at the levels they need to perform at, and that performance can be increased if we concentrate our efforts there. If we allow it to be diluted, then we don't get there. That's number one. But the other piece of it is, what we find is that children of color do, particularly African American children, do less well, middle class African American children do less well than white children in poverty. And so that's a race issue. There's some things in the structure of the system that have to be addressed in order for us to move our system forward and to address the disparities for all children. When we looked at discipline, for example, we know that African American males are suspended at twice the level in Oregon of other populations. We also know, for example, that in special education for ages 5 through 12, the African Americans make up 2.5% of the population, yet 19% of special education in the state. And so when you think that you can ignore the issue of race, it kept coming back. We've got to address the disparities that we're seeing. We have similar data for our other communities of color. Our students from Native American backgrounds, for example, are about 1.6% of the population, yet they're almost 17% of the special education population. There's something in the system that's causing that, and that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Betty and then Lamar.
Dr. McEwen, I have a bunch of things going around in my head. Thank you for doing that. But
for making your head spin?
Yeah. But, you know, this morning we have been talking about equity as it relates to funding. And I think that somehow those two things have some interrelationship. And I would hope that you would come back and talk with us often about progress that's being made in the birth to 12 and how that can influence our decisions and our thinking about equity in, 13 through 20. Because I think we need your thinking to help us look at those individual things and how they are interrelated. Am I making any sense to you at all?
You're making absolute sense, and I appreciate that opportunity to come back and appreciate the fact that you are focusing attention in that way. I think that resources are, when we talk about the distribution of resources, naturally there's going to be pushback. But the reality is you cannot do an equitable system if you're not looking at how resources are distributed or how students have actual access to higher education.
Or the support that they get.
Or the support, the transitions that they receive as well. So I very much appreciate that.
Lamar?
Yeah, so first off, thank you for coming. Just the fact that there is an equity lens gives me a lot of hope as to what the focus is in the state movement. So thank you for that. I had a question. I had a question and then a comment. So what did you mean by dilution? You said that a couple of times in terms of your definition or makeup of the equity lens. So can you speak to that a little bit, or like what your fear was?
I'm sorry, you're fading out a little bit.
Oh, so what was your? Can you speak more specifically to what your fear of the delusion was of the equity lens?
My fear of
delusion.
I think it was dilution.
Oh,
Dilution.
Dilution.
Oh, okay. If I'm understanding your question right, the fear of diluting the equity lens, is that what you're asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you. In terms of diluting the equity lens, I think what I would want to encourage is a particular and intentional focus. Because if we're not intentional about our conversations about equity, if we're not comfortable about our conversations about equity, we won't get there. And if we keep saying, well, if we keep going into a defensive mode about why race is chosen or why, we're focusing in a particular area, we won't get there as well. So my fear is that we don't have those open conversations, and that then dilutes the equity lens. It's not something that is to sit on a shelf. That's not our intent in spending this time. As Carmen talked about, we had over 60-some organizations vet the equity lens, and they gave us a plethora of feedback on the lens, which we incorporated, into our thinking. We could not naturally make sure that everyone's voice was there, but we so appreciated the feedback that we got in terms of the structure and everything. So the dilution becomes whether or not we're going to be intentionally focused on it, or are we going to adopt it as part of what I call lip service and not do anything with it.
Okay. Also, were there student organizations that were a part of that?
Yes, we had, again, I went to one of the high school classes, so I went to Roosevelt High School to their PSU inquiry class of about 25 students. So they had an opportunity to give me feedback on the equity lens. They were really the only student group, and part of that was the time frames. They were really the only student group that gave feedback.
Okay, so I guess my comment is that I would, and I mentioned this to the commission yesterday, is that that I'm always thinking about whose voice is missing in the equation, and what comes up a lot is folks from the LGBTQ community and also alter-able for folks with disabilities, and that's something that I would also like to start focusing on. And I have a firm belief that we are all at a disadvantage, and the only way that we can overcome that system, the system that you're talking about, of that discriminates between race, it also discriminates between a lot of different communities. So I think we're talking about adopting this. I would also like to just insert those different groups in there as well. And I'd like to know what you think in other commissioners as well.
I actually did mention that I did talk with people from the community. I also attended the conference last year as an opportunity for me to know more, right? Because I can't talk about equity without knowing how individual groups and people are feeling. So we did, and we also, that's part of when we look at the section that talks about welcoming inclusion, is welcoming the inclusion of all groups. So the category itself is broad, but the intent is to unpack those beliefs because that was expressly vetted as well. Yeah.
So I would like to, unless there are more questions, move beyond lip service and ask for a motion to adopt the Equity Lens statement and principles and commit to using disaggregated data to guide our research and decisions, and to including the principles in the report to apply to the funding formulas we'll be looking at and their impact, and to include in its scope the communities referenced in Lamar's comments as well. Larry? So that motion has been made by Commissioner Roper. Is there any discussion? And if not, then I'll ask for a vote of record. Commissioner Duval?
Aye.
Commissioner Bryant?
Aye.
Commissioner Dias?
Aye.
Commissioner Reeves?
Aye.
Commissioner Roper?
Aye.
Commissioner
Do we have a chance to
Rubio?
offer one small piece of input?
Yeah.
In addition to that?
Before we
One
conclude.
recommendation would be that that the report be shared with all subcommittees and work groups.
Yeah, yeah.
So that
Okay.
is a reference for their work.
Thank you. Good clarification. Let's see. Commissioner Rubio?
Aye.
Commissioner Wise? Aye. And the chair is an aye, so the policy is and the commitment unanimously adopted. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you
McEwen.
so much, appreciate it.
Now, I'd like to invite Connie Green, president of Tillamook Community College and co-chair of the Common Course Numbering Committee, and Joe Holliday from OUS to come forward and brief us on your work, which also dovetails nicely with the discussions we had in many of our breakout meetings yesterday. So thank you for taking time to be with us, and I want to recognize Donna Llewellyn as well, who's been doing great work staffing the committee.
This is awesome.
Well, thank you, Chairman.
And we'll be taking action today as well on this item.
Thank you, and as I look around this, the HEC and the advisors, some of you and all your many hats over the years, and some of you with new hats in education, I'm excited to see what's ahead. And actually, when Joe and I were asked to co-chair this in September, and you wanted something by November, we really thought you were asking a lot, and we were going to make sure we delivered, because we wanted you to be able to deliver to the legislature with one of your first reports. When this report began, if you look at the House bill that is under the 2979, it was a bill that talks about Common Course numbering. And you will see that we've expanded that to be what makes sense in the education environment today that we're working with. And that was guided by our Joint Board Articulation Committee as well as research. Common Course numbering was something that, if we go back just a few years in our life, about 30 years ago, somewhere we really tried Common Core numbering in Oregon. And it didn't stay, it didn't stick, for a lot of good reasons, reasons that we were all growing. And we didn't have the technology 30 years ago, and we were hiring new faculty, and great things were happening, and everyone had this ability to make great things happen in their classroom. And pretty soon, a few things stuck. Writing 121 is kind of the same, but we did a lot more than writing 121. And over the years, we have done a lot of things together to actually make things stick for students. There is not a lack of commitment between the 17 community colleges or the 7 universities and our private sector partners. But we have done it sporadically based on things from a legislature or based on things from a grant. We have not consistently said we are committed to a consistent set of learning outcomes in key courses. There are most likely equivalencies that work between courses, and there might even be common course numbering. Like Advisor Gillard might talk about Math 111, you know, there's certain, not that I want to get him started there, but he might go there. There are these pieces that we believe that you can get to common course numbering, but the most important thing in education is those outcomes. And when you talk about proficiencies, whether it's high school or post-secondary, it's about outcomes. So when we started this report, we wanted to make sure that we gave you our history of this journey of alignment, and it was more than common course numbering, it's how we did our work together. So in the report, we tried to create a primer, an archive, a history of work that's been done to try to move us along. So as you keep doing your work, you don't have to have the history that some of us have had the opportunity to do in our lifespan with some of you, but you actually have it written down in a certain place. So if you look at the beginning of the report here, and I started this when I was a child, so it's okay, but Senate Bill 342 was one of our biggest current efforts of aligning. We looked at advanced placement alignment. Same, if you get a 4 or 5 on advanced placement, you get the same credit for that at any one of our 24 institutions. We did IB. We tackled dual credit. We now have dual credits being certified, was by joint boards, and I'm sure it will be by HEC, but you had to meet national qualifications to offer dual credit. We tried to do a lot of things that align the learning, the outcomes, and the quality. In that process, we've looked at rural access, we've looked at applied baccalaureate. All of these things, if you take them apart, go back to what's in the program and what's in the course. So you may say rural access has nothing to do with common course numbering or outcomes, has a lot to do with it. So we try to put it in one place for all of us, so we know the work and we know the recommendations. Over time, we have done many reports. I've had the opportunity, the luxury to sit beside a variety of people or myself at these tables and give a report and tell you a recommendation to a legislative committee. They've received all of them. There has been no funding. They've been thanked. And we have moved forward. I'm not putting down. I've done this in years where we don't have a lot of resources. Everything has been thankful. And all the work faculty, administrators and staff, and students put into these reports are there. We're hoping that this will maybe be different. We're saying that because foundationally the reason you have a HEC is because of learning. We happen to have 24 institutions that offer learning in 24 amazing ways. Well, how can we do this together and in common? So in the report, we've tried to give you what we've done and some recommendations. And oh, by the way, because in Oregon, we love the Oregon way, the Oregon way is you go look at best practice in other states and see what other colleges and universities are doing. So we also did that. So first you've got a primer here and a background of why we're doing this. And we actually expanded the report. This common course numbering, equivalencies, and learning outcomes, so that it is the whole bailiwick. Joe, do you want to share a little bit about what we did between September and now to get you this?
Thanks, Connie, and I am mindful of time, so we'll be brief and we'll take your cue if you need us to wrap up at any point. We did, at the beginning of our work in September, with the then Chair Duvall's blessing, we did bring in the Joint Boards Articulation Commission at the beginning and work with them throughout the fall term on this. They are a working group of academic leaders in community colleges, OUS institutions, and independent colleges and universities, as well as staff. in education agencies. And they've been in existence since 1992. Commissioner Wise knows this well as a board member on the Unified Education Enterprise. So they took this back to their campuses, to their professional colleagues, their fellow deans, vice presidents, registrars, etc., to make sure that we had this right. We met several times, and then, as Connie mentioned, we had Donna go do some research, and if time permits, Donna is prepared to talk a little bit about what she found in other states.
So during this fall, I conducted informational interviews with 6 states who have embarked on efforts around common course numbering, course equivalency, and/or learning outcome alignment. States interviewed included Ohio, Montana, Arizona, Texas, Florida, and Utah. The informational interviews focused on 7 questions that were identified by the work group, and they included information or questions around investments, staffing, possible hurdles that might be on the horizon for Oregon, and also the approach that they used to tackling this particular topic. Based upon the informational interviews, the work group made the following observations. Most of the states have centralized staff and budget to support the efforts. It's critical that it be a faculty-driven process and that there be faculty engagement. And while faculty may not be separately compensated, their travel is paid for to engage in discipline and state meetings. And focus on course equivalency is equally, if not more effective than actual common course numbering. So I think Joe will talk more about what happened next.
Connie and I will share that. Connie's going to go first.
So that gets you to almost the end of the report. So hopefully you read what's in between. Those are the high-level summaries. So the report basically says we really want an annual meeting, a convening of our faculty by our gen ed categories to begin with. They meet once a year and just talk about outcomes. And if you want to charge them at the same time to deal with the dual credit issue, you can. Or an AP issue, you can. That's your role. But if they can know every year they're going to meet, it can be planned, they get together, they're able to talk about the issues and those core curriculums, those beginning areas, that will make a world of difference for our learning, our transitions, and our transparency. So we are looking at that as a major recommendation.
And following from that, our second recommendation is that there be a staff person who is responsible for this this alignment work, not just convening faculty towards common course numbering, equivalencies, and outcomes, but this is a very busy intersection, if you will, at the intersection of dual credit, credit for prior learning, applied baccalaureate, AP, to some extent the work we've done on reverse transfer. There's a lot of alignment work that needs to be hands-on, and as we could talk about if time permitted, when we have mounted these efforts in the past, some really wonderful work was done, but this work goes on and on. You don't just get it done. It's not done, it goes on. And to stay in alignment, you absolutely need someone whose job this is to do it. So that's the second recommendation.
We recommend there be a travel budget so that the institutions can send the individuals. That we think that's really important.
And Donna didn't mention it, but in the report she does, that she did a great job on the research. There's always a technology component to this. In the states that do it, there's a range, but it's usually some form of website. The Holy Grail is the portal, where more than just a common course numbering or equivalency table can be found. But there is some technology behind it. We have that technology in Oregon as a result of Senate Bill 342 in 2005 that created Atlas, which is Oregon's version of a product called USelect that allows students to self-advise, regardless of what college they're attending in Oregon, to see what classes they've taken and classes they're thinking of taking, how they would transfer to another college or university. So we have something like in the form of Atlas that will go away this July. Our recommendation is that there be some resource for technology to continue this work.
Last but not least, and usually this gets asked, do you need any administrative rules? Whatever, we don't. This is about a commitment to do the right thing on an ongoing basis versus a sporadic basis, the way it's been done. When Joe talked about the AOT, we did general outcomes, some of you remember this. The Associate of Arts Oregon Transfer aligns with that. We did the Oregon Transfer module inside of that. We did it, it was great. We need to come back to it. How do you start coming back to these things? How do they get refreshed? And that's the reason for this once-a-year convenience by areas, those things can then happen. We know this is a report to the legislature, we know it comes from you. Our hope is that you can own this and potentially look at it as an investment from your point of view. So we tried to lay out investments. It wasn't asked of us, but since some of us have done this work before, we thought it might be good to share some ideas about investments, so then you could take it from there. And the first part of it is no additional investments. We know what will happen. We know that there are going to be some of these things that are going to continue. They'll be sporadic based on grants, and you will not get, as I had, a consistent response that I think you're looking for in the learning environment.
And as I mentioned a minute ago, the Atlas, which is at least the beginning of the work in this area, comes to a hard stop at the end of June without any other action.
Our registrars do have an equivalency table that they currently use, so when you transfer from a PCC to a Portland State, our 24 registrars know how to make some of those things work. Our students don't usually see that. We could potentially, with no investment, begin to put that up for people to see. That would be a really basic way to at least give you a sense of what's happening. So that's investment with nothing new. The second one is truly what we'd like you to do. Not that I would lobby, but I would like you to do is, if you could, invest in a full-time staff person and the travel resources, so we have someone truly, a person, helping us align outcomes, AP, IB, dual credit, credit for prior learning, those instructional areas, somebody to champion that, oversee that, and call us back together. That is really most likely. We would love to have you be the advocates for that, and I think it would be an amazing first act out to the campus faculty and to our administrators to believe that you believe in teaching and learning as much as we do, and you would invest in something like that.
And I think you see the arc here, so maybe we could just go to the last slide there, Donna, that shows ultimately what we think the investment could be.
So we know there's a technology investment. I happen to know that a few of you really think technology is the answer to some of this, so do we. We have to figure out what's the best next technology investment here. And the last recommendation is there a portal? And some of you who were on joint boards and the Unified Education Enterprise, we talked about a portal at one point in time. And once again, that was not a resource that we could bring to bear at that time. So I'm just looking at some of you that have heard this before. But other states who have done this work, they have portals, they have technology behind it, they have staff, and they believe in teaching and learning being aligned in the classroom level. That's what this report recommends. We'll take any questions. And we were excited that we got it done on time in a very short window. Thank you, Vice Chair Duvall, for getting this started with the two of us, with Donna helping us, thank goodness.
Okay, lots of questions, and we're going to make sure we do justice to your report and recommendations, and I want to thank you for giving us some really serious, tough questions to answer in terms of our ongoing commitment hereafter. So we're going to do justice to your request, and we'll open it up to questions. Betty?
Well, on behalf of the old HEC and the new HEC, thank you for doing the impossible, meeting this incredible deadline, and thank you for your suggestions. A couple of things. I don't understand why Atlas comes to a great giant stop, and why and what it would take to keep that going if you think it's been a successful thing. And the other main question is, in order to fund the staff member and the travel budget that you've requested, where would you put that in your priorities? Would you have us take that out of available funding for, I don't know, full-time equivalents, or, what pot should that be a part of?
Sure, I could take the Atlas piece and give the harder question to Connie, if you don't mind. So Atlas, and Ben is very aware of this. He's had a number of meetings and continues to meet with the Chancellor's staff in the Oregon University system. There are many things that need to be transitioned or let go of between now and the end of June as the Oregon University system transitions. So Atlas is one of those things.
I see. So it just needs a new home. and someone to love it.
Right, and this, our intent here is to let you know that, and not to try to be threatening in any way, but simply to say, we'd like you to make a conscious decision, one way or the other, instead of asking next year what happened to Atlas.
Okay, what happened to that?
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Did I see, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Chair Nesbitt.
No, I didn't want to cut you off from answering the tough question.
Here, I thought you were going to help me. Since 1999, my observation is the university system and college system with joint boards and with UEE have done a lot of joint work, and each gave up staff to make something happen. And it was in response to both good work as well as legislative pieces. With CCWD having questions about where it is, the university system being changed and morphed in a very large way. I'm not sure where this person comes from, but there is the capacity in both of those in the past to do something, but it wasn't an ongoing commitment to the convening. It was a response to the legislative requests. So my belief is that there is a resource there. How do you make a commitment? We keep AP and IB aligned. There was someone in OUS working with someone in CCWD. We pulled it together. We have worked on credit for prior learning, and we have people. But how do you put this together with a staff person around alignment? I believe you have the opportunity in the midst of a lot of unknowns to say in this resource pool, this is the foundational piece of what we base education on. Why wouldn't we make a commitment as we shift things to make that happen? So, Vice Chair DeVal, I don't have the answer, but I believe there is commitment and passion, and if we were with intention, it could happen.
Thank you.
So I want to ask Ben to give us more of a picture on our resources, because we're just getting going here, and basically I think we're in a mode of beg, borrow, and budget. We've got a small budget.
The 3 Bs,
and we've got to do a lot more begging and borrowing. So Ben?
I appreciate the emphasis on the begging and borrowing. So what you're not receiving from me today, but I hope you will at subsequent meetings, is an actual hard number sort of budget update from as part of my executive director report to describe how I am deploying HEC specific resources on your and the state's behalf. It is a very small budget that inherits a huge amount of authority and responsibility. And what I think I can say is that there will be a position, maybe more than one position, that is focused on this general category of work, not necessarily a full FTE dedicated to the specific bringing together a faculty to work on common learning outcomes and that associated, but the general issue of coordination of academic strategies across community colleges and universities, better alignment. Yes, there will be staff. They will have a lot of other things to do too under the current budget. And I think that's, you mentioned the legislative requirements and mandates, and especially when that, when those cycles get going, the way in which staff can get sort of spun around the requests that come from that direction. So yes, attention to this work, and hopefully over time more resources to really focus on it.
I appreciate the assurance, Executive Director Cannon, and I also know that until someone is willing to say learning outcomes and courses are real important, we get down to the basics of what happens to align our work, we will continue with policy issues, legislative requests, and I respect every legislator that has a certain pony to ride, but it's not about how we do this better for students. So I would hope that somebody would say, we need to do this piece about student learning. Just have the equity lens. When you do with equity, start aligning out outcomes. Start with your basic courses. What do you need in Oregon Transfer Module? If only those courses were consistently aligned, we would make a world of difference. So it may not be as we recommended. I would hope it is close to, because it will take the intentional bringing together. It's not hard to get on. It's hard to get on Frank's calendar, Dave's calendar, Rob's calendar ahead and say, can I get all of you in this certain topic area together? It's a year's planning to say, find a day, get together. Hilda has seen what it takes to pull people together.
And if you want a rich conversation, you need to guarantee you're gonna have that, you can commit to it. It's that kind of commitment. So I just challenge you, since I know most of you, but some I don't know, that's kind of how I operate. And I challenge you to step forward for students and for learning, because that's what education is about.
David and Duncan?
Yeah, no, thanks for that reassurance, Ben, because I think this is something we're really going to have to make sure somebody's in charge of. And I really appreciate the report and its role for faculty and decisions around curriculum, seeing as in colleges and universities, they are the ones that determine the curriculum of these courses. And I wouldn't want to see anybody else changing them than them. And I think it is imperative they come together. And also, you know, I think also, Connie, you've also raised the point of AP and International Baccalaureate courses, and I think this is something we will have to extend to the whole college and high school programs too, those kinds of things too. I think we're going to have to get the teachers in both sectors together. And I'll just say too, I think it is a small investment to do travel or other sources for a meeting, other resources for a meeting, being one who's done a lot for thank yous in my lifetime. That's great, but sometimes you get competition that's more than a thank you, that's actual money, and you have to say no to the things that only give you a thank you. So I'll just put that in there. I think it's a very, very small strategic investment covering travel and annual meeting once a year. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of stuff done online and over the phone before that, but it's real important for people to get together face to face, especially talking about things about my course and my department, and we're doing it the right way. It's really going to take that face to face to get together, to get that trust and start working towards the good of all students in Oregon.
Thanks, David. Duncan?
He said pretty much everything I was going to say, so I totally agree with him. This is a huge priority. I don't think, if we're going to achieve 40-40-20, we have to align high school, community college, and universities, the curriculum standards. So we've got to stay focused. I love the report, the fact that you gave that history. There has been a lot of great work. And I agree with David, if we don't, the only time this really works is when we have the faculty talking with each other, including high school, community college, and university together. So yeah, I would just agree, this is a big priority. I love the report.
Okay, Lee?
I would also add that yesterday, as we broke into small groups and talked about quality, student success, and access, and affordability, these are priorities that directly align with both of those. And it'd be good to put our money at the end where our life is.
Well, and also our efforts. So when I look at the work we've just launched over the last 2 days, and the work group and committee structure we've set up, I see important parts of this that should be looked at by the Student Success Subcommittee as well as by the Institutional Capacity and Academic Success Subcommittee that Kirby is chairing. And I would think that we should bring these recommendations to our next meeting and to the first meetings of those two subcommittees to help sharpen our focus on how we move forward on this, and because this also strikes me as something that's doable in the near term. Not one of these things that's out there and we're making progress towards but never get to.
And if there's any way that Joe, myself, or Donna can assist you or be part of those in any way in that transition, please feel free to ask. We'll do our best to give you the support to keep it moving and embedded in the fabric of where you're going.
So what is needed is a motion to adopt, but if the same motion could ask for this to be addressed through our two subcommittees as mentioned and through our strategic plan, next step at the next meeting, I think that would be come close at least to doing it justice as much as we can do between now and our next meeting.
So I move to adopt the report and integrate it in our 3 committees as described by the chair.
Okay, on the motion, is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Report is adopted. Thank you again, all of you,
Thank you very much for your endorsement, and
your
we're here
excellent
to
work.
help you move the work.
Now, the joint boards are continuing to meet.
The Joint Boards Articulation Committee is continuing to meet. It is really the practitioner work group. And at some point, you may want to affirm it continues to work, but I don't know how you do this work without a bunch of people who are registrars and all these different levels, faculty, just making things happen. So I would encourage that to continue. It's been a very successful way, and without them, this report could not have come to you with such broad input.
And nobody told them to stop meeting, so they just got.
Good, good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Duncan.
So, Mr. Chair, I do think there is a piece we've got to think about, which is the State Board of Education and the Deputy Superintendent. And this work traditionally, of course, has been those two boards, and I think we do need to have a conversation about how to create some structure that includes K-12. And someone can figure that out, but it's
And
to them is very, very important.
perhaps some involvement in our next meeting then to help.
And we actually right now have a request that I've been holding for Ben until he gets through the retreat to relook at the structure of even the dual credit oversight committee because there's some membership that needs to be refilled, and they serve a very important process in aligning our practices with national accreditation on that. So that'll be coming back to you all.
So, the lights come on. Symbolic. We've all been enlightened in the last day and a half. And Ben, we're going to conclude the meeting with the Executive Director's report.
Very briefly, so these will grow as time goes on, but I just want to draw to your attention a few items in your packet. The first, very importantly, is the draft report from the Advisory Committee on Credit for Prior Learning. This is the standing advisory committee that we should see reflected on the next version of HEC subcommittees and work groups. But this draft report, which is due annually to the legislature, sort of status update on credit for prior learning, has been prepared for your consideration and likely adoption at your December 4th meeting in order to meet the December 31st deadline. So there's not time for discussion today, but questions or concerns on this report you can draw to my attention. Donna Llewellyn, who you just met, will also have prepared this with that advisory committee, so she and I can work with you to respond to questions and make changes if necessary before you take that up for adoption. The next two items are items that I hope you will see monthly from me in written form. And they are updates from two of the offices that are under your and my supervision and oversight. The first is the Oregon Office of Degree Authorization, and you have one handout in your packet and then a second that either just came around or will come around shortly that report on the authorizations for degrees to institutions to provide degrees that ODA under the state's oversight has provided during the last month. So this is a topic, clearly, an authority that essentially you've delegated. The HEC has delegated this authority to me and to the office to kind of oversee on your behalf. There are rules, HEC rules, that establish how colleges and universities go about seeking authorization from ODA to award degrees. So this is a topic we'll want to spend more time on, but for this month, just a status update. You'll get a sort of snapshot of the process, the types of institutions that come forward to the HEC for approval. These are private degree granting institutions that don't meet the exemption test in law. Many of the colleges and universities that Larry Large represents are not required to go through this process due to an exemption in law for certain institutions, but there are many others that do. So that's that. I introduced, did he leave again? Bob Salazar, who I introduced him yesterday after he had left, and then he left again today. He oversees the Office of Private Career Schools, which also comes under the HEC and my authority. It's a sort of existing staff, referred to Bob yesterday. This final piece is an update on their licensing unit and its activity during the month. So again, monthly reports, be interested in feedback from you over time of how you'd like to see this information. But generally, the notion here is it won't require action on your part, but it's certainly activity under ultimately your authority that you should be aware and updated about.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Ben, on the update, if you could include information concerning the backlog dealing with the office degree authorization. And my congratulations to you and Hilda, because I'm not getting the phone calls I once was, so things must be moving smoothly in that regard.
All credit to Hilda, who through this transition has really been working most closely with the staff at ODA.
And I can share that we have taken significant strides in addressing the backlog, and we'd be glad to provide you with that update.
And I'd be curious too, Ben, not immediately, but sometime, just a little background on what's the criteria for online programs under this out-of-state approval program.
Yeah, happy to provide this. This is a there's a huge piece of work here that the state does in the interest of protecting students, protecting employers, protecting the general public, and providing certain assurances around the sort of quality and integrity of degrees that are used in Oregon and granted to Oregon students. So it's a major kind of licensing and regulatory authority, and you will ultimately oversee the rules for it within the statutory direction.
Okay, we also have a list, which I think you saw in what we emailed out, of our meetings for 2014. Skipping over for a minute now, our next meeting in December, I'll come back to that. What we're going to try to do is every third meeting, so once a quarter, meet on a campus of a university or community college. We all enjoyed the tour yesterday at the Chemeketa Viticulture Center, and this is an opportunity for us to be oriented to the programs and work being done at our institutions, so we'll see if we can set that up. Let's say one every 6 months might take us where we have to stay overnight. But given our budget constraints, time constraints for all of you, we'll limit that to about twice a year. So once a quarter at a community college or university, and half the time maybe traveling to Southern Oregon, Eastern Oregon, or wherever. So hopefully those dates will hold for all of you. And I also want to call attention to our next meeting on December 4th. This list of committees and work groups, subcommittees and work groups that we passed out will be updated to reflect a few changes since we discussed it at the start of this meeting. And I will look forward to the subcommittees having time to build will be their first meetings into our meeting time on December 4th. So we'll work with you on getting that scheduled. And those of you who are chairing those committees or work groups, with the exception of Larry's, which is already underway, work with me as you and with Ben on the resource persons you may think you'll need, and I think we will be hearing from others about their interest in joining. So these are not yet complete as to their membership of resource persons. And with that, I feel like we've accomplished a lot, and I'm going to look at Angela for telling us what we forgot.
I just need your I-9s, W-4s, and board questionnaires, and I will send you your reimbursement forms by mail, okay?
Okay. Kirby?
Do you want to know which meetings we can't attend on the schedule?
That would be good.
If you could email me, that'd be great.
Okay, well, I want to thank all the people who presented and helped us through the last day and a half, and thank the commissioners for time really well spent, I think.
Thank you. Great job.
Thanks. Good job. Meeting's adjourned.